This story happened in October of 2004, back when I was still a third-year high school student. My friends and I stuck around the school late at night after our annual Halloween party. We had agreed to try out my friend's Ouija board. It wasn't the brightest idea, but we needed a thrill. We found a nice spot under a huge Nara tree and proceeded with our half-assed ritual. There were about 5 of us, 2 boys and 3 girls. We were all expecting some kind of paranormal contact. Rumors had it that our school was haunted, but we'd never really experienced anything firsthand, and it was Halloween when all the spirits came out to play. We all wanted to get spooked. Also, we've never seen a Ouija board firsthand before, so we were really stoked. Our school was an old Spanish colonial house built in the 1800s when the Spaniards still occupied the Philippines. We were in a section of the school that doesn't get used often. Located beside a creepy old Jesuit house, people only go there when they needed to use the restroom, store equipment on one of the sheds, or make out with their boyfriend/girlfriend. We sat down in the middle of an open space, with only an exposed, bare bulb nearby illuminating our surroundings. We were all having a laugh, scaring each other with what-if scenarios. It was your typical dumb kids doing dumb things kind of night. My friend who brought the Ouija board proceeded to place it in the middle of our circle. If I remember correctly, it was the glow-in-the-dark version, which we found hilarious, but it did give us the ability to see what was written in the dark. Not knowing what to do, and going after what we've only seen in movies, we all proceeded to place our index finger on top of the planchette. We sat there looking at each other until one of us said, "What's next?" We didn't know if there was a proper way to start the ritual. Plus, the board didn't come with instructions, so we decided to just throw in a question. "Is anyone there?" I called into the darkness. "If there are any spirits living here, please speak to us," one of the girls joined in. We clearly had no idea what we were doing, and still, nothing happened. Not even the slightest bit of wind. One of my friends jerked the planchette, and the girl who brought the Ouija board screamed, breaking the silence. We all laughed at how ridiculous that it was. After a bit more joking around, we decided to give it another go. We all placed our index fingers on the planchette once more and asked, "If there's anyone there, we would like to make contact." "Don't break the circle," one of my friends jokingly said. "Shut up," I whispered. We were just about to get ready to give up when the wind started to pick up. The stillness broke, and the darkness around us seemed to move. Just a coincidence, we thought. "Okay, don't break the circle," I said. "Is anyone there?" I was excited. It was like a scene from a film with dirt and dead leaves swirling all around us. "Guys, I'm scared," my friend sitting beside me said. "My mom warned me about playing with forces that we don't know." "Did you die here?" I asked. "Were you killed during the war? Are you the headless priest that roams these halls? Do you know Jose Ritzel, our national hero? Are you a hottie?" My friend giggled. At this point, we were all throwing out random, stupid questions, and there was still nothing. "This is bull. I don't want to do this anymore," my friend said, exasperated. We were all thinking the same thing. Just then, a group of dogs from the neighboring house started barking at us through the chain-link fence. These 6 dogs were growling and showing teeth. We all screamed, and without finishing the ritual, bolted right out of there. We didn't see each other until after Halloween break, and this is where the story gets really creepy. One of the girls told us about a weird experience she had the night after playing with the Ouija board. She had gotten home late after hanging out with her friends from the neighborhood when she realized she forgot the keys to her house. So she called up her brother, who was then still sharing a room with her, and what he said crept the hell out of her. He swore that she was already home. He claimed to have seen her walk in a while ago, and that she looked really tired, and that he saw her head straight to bed. Weird, but no need to freak ourselves out, was all we really thought about it. Besides, her brother must have just been tired and seeing things. But then my other friend started telling us about an encounter that she had that Halloween night. She was going up to her room when the lights began to flicker as she was ascending the staircase. She shrugged it off, blaming it on faulty wiring. But just then, she saw the door to her room open and a dark figure stepped out and stood atop their staircase. She couldn't make out the entity's face, but she recounted that she couldn't move and felt utter dread as the figure stared down at her. "No way," my best friend, who just joined in the conversation, said in disbelief. "Something happened to me as well." He recalled that he was sleeping one night when he woke up feeling really uncomfortable. He described his vision as having TV-like static and that there was a feeling of heaviness that surrounded him. He looked around the room, and that's when he saw a bloody, charred face with piercing red eyes grinning at him through the window. I couldn't believe what I was hearing because I had an almost run-in with death that night. After the ritual, I was sleeping in our sedan on the way home after fooling around with the Ouija board when I felt our car jerk. I woke up instantly. Looking out the window, I discovered that we had been hit by a huge oil tanker. I panicked and leaped out of the car. Luckily, my mom and I survived the crash since the front of the car was a total wreck. I still don't have an explanation as to why those things happened to us, but I'm thankful that nothing else happened after that. I've never played or gotten near a Ouija board since. I work in a hospital that's run by the Sisters of a Catholic convent. This hospital is pretty old, set almost in the early 1910s. Needless to say, quite a few buildings on the campus are ancient and eerie. No feet. I had night duty a few days back, and since there weren't any patients to attend to, I went to sleep in the room assigned to me in the emergency room itself. A few minutes in, I felt extremely cold. It was the peak of summer and this coolness just didn't feel right. I got up, switched on the lights, and went out calling the nursing staff. I told them I didn't feel comfortable sleeping in there tonight. They were more than happy to entertain me for the rest of the evening. One of the staff is a dear friend, and she asked if I wanted to hear a ghost story. I jumped in because now we were a crowd, and there was no reason to be afraid. She told me about this incident in the baby ward. It was the middle of the night. A mother walked up to the nurse's station requesting for a bowl to feed her child. One of the nurses noted down the details, mother's and baby's name, and handed over the bowl. A few seconds later, the same nurse happened to look back and saw that the woman had no feet and was floating away in the air. She pointed to the other sister as well. After recovering from what they had seen, the nurse fired up the system to check the patient's name, and to their surprise, the discharge summary by the baby and mother's name showed up. The mother had died of postpartum hemorrhage after delivering a premature baby, and the baby too had passed away a few days later due to some neonatal infection. C floor. This floor consists of private wards and is pretty posh. There's a call switch for each ward which the patient rings in case they need something, and the bell sounds in the nurse's station. One of my usual nightly duties, I was typing a discharge summary when the bell to Ward 7 rang. The nurses were on break and seemed to not hear it. My senior asked me to go check on it in case it was our patient. I got up and walked through the dark corridor in search of room 7, which was at the end of the hallway. The lights were off, and it seemed like whoever was inside was sleeping. I knocked, but nobody responded. A strange sense of fear crept through me. I ran. I reached the nurse's station. My senior looked up to see me breathing heavily. He asked if I was all right. I told him that the room was dark, and that no one opened the door when I knocked. The nurses walked in at the same time and told me that there was no one admitted in Ward 7 and that the bell often rang like that. They wouldn't react unless someone was admitted. SICU bed number 1. The curious case about this bed is that no matter who ends up on it, eventually dies, no matter how young or healthy that the patient is. The incidents have been pretty unnatural over the past few months, and there's no scientific explanation. Just a few days back, a 22-year-old boy was admitted for gallbladder surgery, was shifted to SICU after surgery, and a few hours after shifting, he developed breathlessness and died before intubation. Doctors usually do not like their patients to be assigned to this bed. Even if the SICU is full, as soon as a bed vacates, a patient from number 1 immediately gets assigned a number 2 bed. There's no backstory about this. At least, not that I'm aware of. In 2015, I worked a couple weeks at one of those Halloween stores that are in town for the season. This particular location was in an old Kmart building that had been empty for a number of years. A particular problem for this building was the homeless population breaking in to have a safe place to sleep out of the cold. My first day, I was put in the back area, shuffling stock onto pegs. Being my first day, I hadn't met everyone, so when I saw movement out of my peripheral vision, I didn't pay much attention to it. Way off in the back corner of the building, outside the double doors going into the old stock room, I saw a man. He was very tall, maybe 6'3", Hispanic, with long curly dark hair, a dark complexion, white t-shirt, and blue jeans. I figured it was simply a coworker that I hadn't yet met and didn't think anything of it. A few moments later, I looked up, and the fellow was gone. A shift later, I'm an opener. Our manager tasks a coworker and I with going into the old stockroom to look for a cart for stock. We get back there, and a motion-activated light in the hallway on the other side of a swinging door turns on. Then the next. My coworker freaks and says, "Oh crap, it's probably another homeless person who broke in. Come on, let's go catch them and make sure the back door is locked." So we chase after the movement. We get into the hall, which has a door on either side, to see no one. But in the next area where the back door is, the light's turned on. We run in there, and a stairwell leads up from this area to the old offices. The lights going up the stairs start turning on like someone is going up, but there is no one there. Not a rat, a moth, or so much as a cockroach to trigger the motion sensors. We double-check the back door, and it is securely chained and locked. My coworker turns white as a sheet and says, "That's it. I am done. We're the hell out of here." A shift or two later, I ended up in the back area again, shuffling stock around. From my peripheral vision, I see the same man again, but this time he's maybe 15 feet away. I pay attention this time, and could make out the detail pretty well. His clothes were dirty, and he wasn't wearing shoes. The guy was just standing there, though, not moving. After a few unnerving moments of seeing him there in my peripheral vision, I look directly at him, and he's no longer there. That's odd, I thought, not connecting the dots. I just shrug it off and continue working. My final shift was on Halloween. I'm sorting merch between carts, putting broken stuff in one cart and resellable stuff in the other. The next thing I know, someone is standing a foot away, directly in front of me. Looking down at the cart between us, I can see him perfectly out of the corner of my eye. I could see the grime on his clothes. I could see his breathing. I knew in that moment if I looked up, he wouldn't be there. I suddenly got irrationally angry, a type of anger I've never felt. I said to him without even thinking, "I know what you are. I know what you're trying to do. I'm not afraid of you. You are not welcome here. By the power of the priesthood, I command you to leave now." He growls one guttural growl, and then is gone. No fading out, no puff of wind and smoke. Just gone. At my current job, a year or two later, one of my coworkers and good friends is a devout Catholic. I told him about the ghost of the homeless guy in the Kmart building, and he just stands there and stares at me. Do you have any idea what you did and how dangerous it was? You exorcised it. You're not a priest. You should have never been able to do that. You're damn lucky it was just a ghost and not a demon. I never even considered that, nor did I consider my words before I spoke them to the ghost. It was spontaneous, like muscle memory or like I was being guided. My friend still says I was lucky, and not to do some stupid crap like that again. Disclaimer. I am completely aware that this story involves me being very stupid and careless. I'm not going to inject these acknowledgments into the story, but rest assured that in hindsight, I am aware of the foolishness that took place. Now, where to begin? The year was approximately 1998 or 1999. I was a young gay man in my early 20s, living in a medium-sized city in the Midwestern US. This was sort of an in-between transitional time for gay people, where in most populous areas we had enough respect to live openly, but there was still plenty of people who did not like us. It was well before the invention of smartphones, and the internet was still in the early stages of mass adoption. There were large communities online, but it was not yet at that point where most Americans were online. Online socialization consisted of chat rooms hosted by various services like AOL, Yahoo, or IRC servers, and message boards were still in use by large numbers of people. For gay men at the time, it was nothing short of revolutionary. Prior to the internet and to the broader cultural changes, gay men had been stuck looking for fun in secretive and/or shady places due to the inability to freely express ourselves. In the 90s, it was still somewhat risky, but the internet offered a way to talk freely and relatively anonymously without the risk of being outed or worse. For this reason, it really took off in the gay communities, and gay men were a very large part of the user bases for these social platforms. It was suddenly very easy and relatively safe to find dates, friends, or just sex, and it quickly became the norm for a lot of gay men. On the other hand, being such a new tool for most people for communication, we were sometimes blind to the risks. Being an attractive young man in my prime, I made liberal use of the online communities to find dates. That is to say, I had plenty of hookups. My city had a decent number of chat rooms and personal message boards, and I had mostly great experiences. I met the typical assortment of good guys, closet cases, and the weirdos that you would expect. I was an absolute quote-unquote hoe by most standards, but suffice to say that a cute gay guy at that time could generally have a lot more dates than your typical straight person. At some point during this time, I had some brief chat on a message board with a guy from my city. I forgot his screen name, it's been over 20 years, so let's call him Slim Guy 65. This back and forth had happened on a general thread in the gay section, not in private messages, so it was visible to anyone who chose to read that thread. Nothing had come of it, but a week later, I received an email from an unrecognized address. The email basically said, "Hey, I'm not gay and I don't agree with the gay lifestyle. I'm here because my friend met this guy, Slim Guy 65, from the message board, and the guy really hurt him. I don't want to see this happen to anyone else. My friend tried to tell the police, but they wouldn't do anything. I see you're talking to Slim Guy 65, so just be careful and stay away from him." Okay, I thought, that's strange. What does this person mean by really hurt him? Was his heart broken? Did he get beaten up or verbally abused, or what? I responded to the email, asking for clarification on what exactly had happened. I never received a response. I was slightly weirded out by it, but on the other hand, it's an anonymous email from someone who doesn't respond and is vague about their warning. This could be anything. It could be some disgruntled ex trying to mess with the guy. It could be a real warning about some gay bashing. It could be someone trolling who doesn't have anything to do with anyone. I kept it in the back of my mind, but pretty much shrugged it off. Several weeks later, I had a weekday off of work and decided to take to the internet, as was my custom. Lo and behold, I had an email response to a personal ad. It was Slim Guy 65. He was offering to meet at his place to hang out and just have a good time. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. I won't go into the details. As I recall, there weren't really many details discussed other than small talk and intros that we had done previously. Nothing about this guy was really sounding interesting to me, but I had no other offers on this day, so I decided why not. I'll go see what this dude is about. As I typed my reply, I suddenly remembered the strange email that I had received warning me about this person. I went back and reread it. Still vague, still presenting more questions than answers. Should I take this anonymous warning at face value and just ignore SG65? I decided to go check him out anyway. His address was on a rather busy street in the middle of a dense residential area, not some shack out in the woods, and I can handle myself. If he's weird, I can just nope out of there. Before long, I arrived at the house at the agreed time. It was a duplex-style home, with one apartment on the ground floor and one on the second floor, part of a row of several identical duplexes. It was the middle of the afternoon, there was plenty of traffic on the street, and the occasional person out on their porch or their backyard. I pulled up the driveway to the parking area behind the house, got out, and knocked on the door. The guy that answered was a pretty normal, kind of mousy-looking man, probably in his 40s. Slight, slim build, soft-spoken, looked like just about any guy working in any office cubicle anywhere. Not really my type, but honestly, my curiosity was piqued, and I had nothing better to do, so I stepped inside to take a look around and gauge the situation with the warning email fresh in my mind. I stepped into the back door, into the kitchen. It was very clean, and there was nothing out on the counters, no table, no chairs, nothing. That is to say, it did not look like someone was living there. It had been kept up and cleaned, but was empty. Looking out into the apartment, I could see that it was not set up as a living space. It had a large window with sliding glass that was between the kitchen and living room, and I could see what looked like a large table out in the living room area. SG65 said something like, "This isn't where I live. A friend of mine used to run a doctor's office here and I maintain the building for him. It's private though, we have the place to ourselves." Weird. Okay. He shut the back door and locked it with a keypad deadbolt. The kind you need a key to open, even from the inside, and put his keys in his back pocket saying, "So what do you want to do?" At this point, my danger sense spiked. This is not a normal home, and why is he locking the door like that? It's not necessarily suspect. A lot of people have that sort of lock on their door, and the door has a window in it, so it makes sense even. Still, something is not right here, I can tell, and now I'm locked in. I asked him why he was locking the door like that, which immediately flustered him. He was looking around rather nervously, and his voice was wavery and halting. Not quite stuttering, but almost. He said, well, we don't want someone to come in and interrupt us, right?" Flashing a weak, unconvincing smile. His demeanor and body language were all I needed to confirm that this guy was up to no good, or at least that there was something he was hiding. However, I could tell that I was intimidating him. I wasn't a particularly muscular kid, but I have a larger frame. Like, even when I'm at my thinnest, I still wear size L tops and 36 waist pants, so I look big, which people tend to interpret as me being stronger than I really am. Also, I'm not a tough guy at all, but I have a resting facial expression that makes me look like a thug. People who don't know me often assume that I'm rough or something. I sometimes use this to my advantage while I can, because before long a new acquaintance will eventually figure out that I'm a total wimp. But this was definitely an occasion to play up the tough guy appearance, and I did exactly that. I put on my best steely face and told him to unlock the door, and that I don't want to be locked in here. He looked for a moment like he was going to pee his pants, then said, "Okay, alright, I'll unlock this." He unlocked the deadbolt. "And I'll just lock the knob here." And he turned the little dial that locks the doorknob. That was fine with me. I continued to stare at him until he said, "I'll leave the keys on the counter right here." And he set his keys down near the sink. I was relatively satisfied with that answer. At this point, though, my adrenaline was flowing, and I was almost in full flight-or-fight mode. But I was stuck, kind of stuck in place. The guy was between me and the door. I was freaked out, but this little weasel did not appear to pose any immediate physical threat to me. I could tell that his pant pockets were empty, and that I was intimidating the living hell out of him. I didn't yet know exactly what to do. Now keep in mind that despite my wordy descriptions, this all happened very quickly without any really long pauses. It had only been maybe 1 to 2 minutes since I had stepped in the door. This all happened at the pace of a conversation. The guy was obviously nervous and trying not to appear so. He said, "Well, let's go in," and walked a wide path around me through the kitchen into what would normally be the living room, and toward the hall to the right from there. I was familiar with this floor layout. It's very common in the area. The hallway would lead to 2 small bedrooms, with a bathroom in between them. I hesitated, thinking that I should just walk out that back door and take off. But really? Now I was super curious. I knew there's no way in hell I'm doing anything with this guy, but I kinda want to see what's going on in here. Also, I'm confident that he can't take me if it comes to a fight. So, I slowly headed toward the living room. It felt like I was walking in slow motion. From the kitchen entrance, I could see a large, rectangular, stainless steel table taking up a lot of the living space. I remember thinking this looks like a surgical table. It looked like it could rise and tilt, and it had a recessed channel running all the way around the edge. In hindsight, I now know what it was. It was 100% a mortician's table. Dude had a mortician's table in there. But at the time, I just thought it looked like some sort of medical table. There were some other office-type cabinets and stuff around, I think, but now all I really remember is the table itself. The large front window looking out onto the street was covered by vertical blinds that were closed. SG65 said something like, "This used to be a doctor's office, like I said. Come on back here." The hallway revealed the room setup that I had expected. The first bedroom door was closed. The second door was open to a very small, very clean bathroom. At the end of the hall was the other bedroom, which looked like, if the doctor's office story were true, had at one time been converted to an exam room. He said, "We can go in that room if you want. Go ahead and take a look." And he stayed by the other closed bedroom door. The back bedroom door was open, and I could see the walls were covered in a honey-colored wood paneling, the type you might see in a den or office that hasn't been updated since the early 70s. I slowly took a few steps toward that door, trying to be very aware of what Mr. Creepy was doing behind me. He didn't move. When I got up to that room, the first thing I noticed was the door had a keypad deadbolt lock, just like the back door. This room locked from the outside. I wondered if there was a lever on the inside, but I pretty much know the answer to that question without needing to check. I also saw a chair. A non-swiveling, plastic desk chair with thin metal legs sitting near the center of the room. The room had old, dark carpet and those wood-paneled walls. I noticed that the walls were completely paneled with no windows. And I know that room had at least 1 window, probably 2, so whoever did that paneling went over them on purpose. There was also a phone in there, plugged in, and sitting on the floor. It was an old office phone, probably from around the 80s or early 90s, dingy beige plastic with several buttons to manage different phone lines. It was just sitting there on the carpet near the wall, with the chair at a slight distance facing the phone. There was nothing else in that room. I was standing at the threshold of the room, with 1 foot slightly in, absolutely not going past that door frame. I looked back at Dude. He was still standing by the other door, just nervously smiling at me, trying very hard to look casual, but obviously very nervous or something. He said something like, "Well, what do you want to do?" Instead of answering, I felt around the back side of the deadbolt lock. Sure enough, nothing there but the smooth wood of the door. It also dawned on me that I did not see a light switch anywhere for the ceiling lamp. Where was the switch? Who knows? It should have just been on the inside of the door, of course, but that original switch was covered by the paneling. He mumbled something about not having the key to that lock. Don't worry about it. I turned back to face the guy and just said, "What is it that you want to do in here?" My skin had gone ice cold as I realized that I was way, way, way too far into this apartment. I was running through my options in my head. What was this guy going to do? He didn't appear to have any weapon or anything in reach, but who the hell knows what goes on in that place? What are you trying to do? He was almost totally derailed by that. He stammered out, "Some hot man-to-man fun?" With the weakest smile that I have ever seen, looking like he was just a hair's breadth away from panicking. That sounds comical, but really, that sentence was probably the most chilling part of the entire experience for me. It was the way he said it. Like he had to come up with something on the fly, something that would sound plausible, and he failed. Who says that in real life? "Hey, do you want to have some hot man-to-man fun?" Nobody. It's something you'd see on an advertisement for a cheesy porn site or something. That was it. I said, "Nope, I want to go. I'm leaving." He said, okay. I quickly walked past him as he flattened himself against the wall to avoid me, and I noped right out through the living room dissection area and through the kitchen to the back door, which was thankfully still not deadbolted. The keys were still on the counter. I let myself out and didn't bother closing that as I saw him slowly coming to the door behind me. I deliberately walked, not ran, to my car. Looking back at the building, I could see that indeed there was a window facing the backyard area from that paneled room, but of course it was covered up from the inside. Dude was shutting and locking the back door, and I left. Heart pounding, skin icy cold, thinking, holy crap, what was that? So, was this guy some sort of killer? Or was he just an awkward, closeted gay guy with access to a sterile-looking apartment with an autopsy/mortuary table? And a windowless room that locks from the outside, with a chair and a phone and no light switch. It's clear to me that the poor soul who walks into that room gets locked in. He probably shuts off the light from somewhere and calls the phone. Other than that, it's anyone's guess as to what actually happens. I assume the friend of the judgmental person who emailed me must have been some kid that got locked in for whatever game ensues. Driving home, at first I thought, of course I have to call the police and tell them what's in that place. But thinking it through, I realized that I didn't really have any crime to tell them about. I went to meet a man for casual sex, and what? He has a room with a chair in it? He has, as I thought at the time, an exam table? The police aren't going to do anything with that story. The guy didn't touch me or do anything to me, and I left. I considered calling an anonymous tip line, but again, what exactly would I report? There was no actionable crime. Also, keep in mind that at that time, while the local police in the city were pretty decent, they weren't especially interested in getting involved with helping out the gays. They would prosecute actual crimes if it was cut and dry, but I heard plenty of accounts of them not choosing to follow up on cases where there was not an easy arrest to be made. I decided not to report anything because nothing would come of it except drawing unwanted attention to myself. Even in retrospect, I think that was probably the most rational choice to make. If this happened today in 2020, the law enforcement would probably be a lot more interested in it. But back then, not so much. So, live and learn. I still drove past that house once in a while during the normal course of life over the next several years, and I'd pay attention to how it looked. The vertical blinds were closed for maybe 5 or 6 years whenever I went past. Then, eventually, the blinds were down, and there were decorative curtains in the windows, so I assumed that the place was eventually sold to someone who actually lived in it. Around 2002, maybe 2003, there was the murder of a young man on the news. He had been found in the next state, which borders on my city, so it's not very far away. I recognized the guy from the gay community, but didn't know him personally. A friend mentioned to me something about the local serial killer. I said, "What?" He explained that a few young men had gone missing over the past year, each after being at one specific dive bar, and each being found several miles to the north past the state line, and out in the country. The case on the news matched with that MO. My friend told me that the young guy had been at that bar and left with someone that night, and that he had disappeared. The news report didn't mention anything about a gay bar or similar recent cases, of course. I had to wonder if my acquaintance from the internet had anything to do with it. The location of the murders apparently was nowhere near that duplex, or at least according to the story I was told. I never heard of a resolution to that murder on the news, or any official mention of a suspected serial killer other than gossip. I want to start this off by saying that I only talk about this because it's part of my healing process and helps me to deal with the trauma of losing my infant son. In 2007, I was 9 months pregnant with my last child. I had had preeclampsia with previous pregnancies and a placenta abruption with a pregnancy 7 years prior, so I was being monitored very closely. Not as closely as I should have been, but that's another story for another time. The evening of December 12th, I became ill. I felt dreadful, and looked at my abdomen and thought that it looked rigid and strange. Instantly, I knew that I was dying. I can't explain it, but simultaneously I heard a whisper in my left ear, a soft, gentle whisper that said, "The baby has died." I instantly thought I was losing my mind, and yelled at my son to call 911. We were in the middle of a winter storm, so our phones were dead. I finally got a neighbor to call my husband, who took me to the maternity ward of a large hospital. One of the most experienced nurses happened to be on duty, thank goodness, because I coded when I got to the floor. I'd had a 3rd-degree abruption. 4th degree is death. I spent 2 weeks in the hospital and had to go on dialysis for a while. My ammonia levels were high, so for quite a bit I thought that I had given birth. I did get to hold him. He was beautiful, with dark curls. When I got to the medical surgery floor, I was coherent and trying to come to grips about why this had happened to me. One night, I had awoken to voices. I thought it was my family in my room. My eyes were closed, but I was awake and heard what sounded like 20 people talking to me. I was lying there, trying to understand what they were saying about me, but all the people were talking so fast, and in a hushed tone. I opened my eyes to find no one there. Not one soul. What scared me was that as I opened my eyes, one person said, "Shh." A second person said, "Shh." Then there was a collective, "Shh." I was terrified, in a dark room with the door shut, and I had a hard time moving around because of my emergency C-section incision. I started calling for my husband. He didn't answer. He would often sleep on the floor, beside my bed on a pull-out sofa chair. Suddenly, a small, olive-toned girl of 6 or 7 appeared beside my bed. She had 2 curly ponytails, and was dressed in 1970s-type clothing. I could not see her eyes, just dark shadows. She pointed to the other side of my bed and said, "He's over there." My husband had been on the left side of my hospital bed and was asleep. I turned back to face her, and she was gone. Having that experience in the hospital helped change my insight about death. I know that I will see my infant son again one day. I also think that the people's voices I heard may have been people that had passed away at that hospital, as well as the little girl. I felt no threat at all, but was frightened because this was so unexpected. Once a year, my parents go on a vacation together somewhere in the US, usually to the Bahamas or to Florida. They leave me in charge of the house with my dog and like for me to check on my Nana, who lives in our basement. My dad likes to take part in this weird golfing competition with his friends, where if someone wins a certain amount of holes, they get to take home this creepy doll as sort of a trophy. I don't get why, but I guess it's just some running gag. Well, my dad won the competition and he brought it home before he left. I'm not at all scared of dolls. In fact, before he left, I slept with it beside me as a joke. It was basically an old baby doll with a missing eye and a brown dress. I don't know the origin of it and didn't really bother to ask. November rolls around and my parents leave for their vacation. Everything goes normal for a while, but then things start to get weird. Because I'm the stereotypical little brother, I put the doll on my sister's bed, who's in university, and took a picture to send her as a joke. She hates dolls. So I leave the room with the doll still in there and head to my room just to send the photo and move on with my life. A few minutes later, I hear a massive bang. I jump, startled, and go to look out into the hallway. My sister's bedroom door has slammed shut. Now, our hallway has no opening windows, and there wasn't any sort of draft. Even if there was, that bang sounded forceful. A little on edge, I open her door and see that the doll has fallen face forward, even though I left it sitting upright. I thought it was weird, but brought the doll back into my room and moved on. That night, I'm sleeping normally in my parents' bedroom. I have to sleep in there while my parents are away because I need to keep an eye on my dog, and she refuses to sleep anywhere else. I wake up suddenly in the night, which is odd. I usually sleep all the way through the night. I check the time and see that it's around 3 a.m. This immediately scares me because I read that it's the witching hour. I glanced over at my dog, and she was awake too with her head up. Also strange. I put on my little puppy voice and ask my dog if she needs to pee, but she just stares back at me, then looks to the closet. I look to the closet too, and see that it's open even though I remember shutting it before going to bed. I quickly turn the lamp on and get out of bed to close the door. I don't even bother looking inside. My teenage brain still thinks a ghost is more likely than an intruder. So I get back into bed, scroll on my phone a bit, until I fall back to sleep. I wake up the next morning as usual to feed my dog, but when I go out into the hall, I see my bedroom door is open. I always close my door when I'm not in there. Now, it was still dark out because I have to feed my dog around 6 a.m. or she throws a fit. I look inside my room, turn on the light, and the doll is on the floor. I left it on my bed. I remembered last night and am now feeling paranoid, but again, I just put the doll back on my bed and leave, deciding just to have my door open. After feeding my dog, I went back to bed to sleep a couple extra hours. That's when the most frightening thing happened. I was woken up by a loud banging sound. Loud enough to wake me up, the heaviest sleeper in my family. I quickly got up and ran downstairs, my first thought being maybe my Nana had fallen in the basement and was banging for me to help her, but when I got downstairs I realized that the banging was coming from my balcony door. I saw the glass shaking, as if something was hitting it from outside. The banging was so loud that it was shaking the counters. The strangest part is that my dog was just standing in front of the door staring at it, and she's the type of dog who will start barking if a mouse farts. I'm really shaken up at this point. It's completely still outside, no wind at all. I text my parents and tell them what's going on. As soon as I do, the banging stops. They tell me it's probably nothing to worry about. I went downstairs to see my Nana, but she had no idea what happened. She's also completely deaf, so of course she couldn't hear it. She can't even walk up the stairs, so there's no way she caused any of it. That was the last weird incident that happened. The next week, my parents got back. I didn't tell them everything that happened because I didn't want them to think I'm a chicken or something. Needless to say, I moved the doll out of my room until my dad brought it back to his golf team. Nothing else strange occurred. I still have no idea what went on during those couple of days. I sort of wonder about the story behind that doll now, but I don't really know if I want to ask my dad. I was 14 at the time of this story. My mom was a pretty hardcore Christian. She went to this church for a long while, and every year they had this drama called Hell Night. It was during the week of Halloween, Halloween being the last night to do it. Basically, it was a drama where a certain made-up character would die and be judged by God and show what their life was like, and on and on. Anywho, my mother played a demon in this, and said she had a certain outfit that she had to wear with white contacts and the whole getup. One day after getting home from school, the house was empty. Or so I thought. Out bursts my mother from her room in the back of our long hallway in her full costume on all fours, crawling toward me like she was legit possessed. I almost shit myself. So Halloween night comes, and I decide to stay home from this night of the drama. It usually lasts until 1 a.m. or longer, and I still had school to worry about. So I'm hanging out at home, ignoring the knocks on the door because I had no candy. Well, I'm sitting on the couch watching TV, and I hear my mother's room door swing wide open. I get off the couch and peek down the hallway, and there she is, on all fours, looking dead at me. But I couldn't see her face because the wig was covering it. As she crawled towards me, in my head I was thinking, nice try, but I'm not falling for this again. But this time, it's a hell of a lot faster, and she makes a hard left down 2 sets of stairs into our finished basement. After that, I didn't hear anything else that night. Mind you, my mother was still at our church, in the middle of doing the drama, and she didn't get home for a couple more hours. Typing this brought back that feeling. I can't explain it. But I know that whatever I saw was not my mother. I have always been interested in the paranormal and going ghost hunting, as me and my friends called it. This story takes place on an October night in 2005. We had gathered at my dad's house for a party. We lived way out in the country, in an old farmhouse. We decided to drive up the road to an old cemetery because one of my friends showed up with a Ouija board. I said we weren't going to use it at my house, but I was game to use it somewhere else. About 6 of us piled into different vehicles and took off. When we got there, we set the Ouija board up on an old concrete barrier that surrounded the entrance of the cemetery. For context, the cemetery was set on a hill surrounded by cow pastures, fields, and trees. Across the road stood an old, white church. There were 2 security lights that lit the church area and the entrance to the cemetery. There was one more security light that lit the field next to the only house for about 2 miles. We all stood in a circle, planchette in the centers, hands all on it. My friend led the seance and asked if there was anything in the cemetery with us. At first, nothing happened, and we all stood still and quiet. Then the planchette slowly moved toward yes. Immediately, we all started accusing each other of moving it, but everyone swore that they didn't. An eerie feeling fell over us as the planchette moved back to the center of the board. About that time, we heard what sounded like wind initially, but began to get closer. It sounded like the footsteps of multiple people running in circles all around us. We were all wide-eyed, looking at each other when someone said, "I'm out." Another person said, "We have to tell it bye or the spirits will follow." The leader of the group spoke to the board and said something along the lines of, "We are saying goodbye to you," and the planchette quickly jerked to no. It was pretty obvious by how shocked we all were that none of us had done that. Mind you, the sound of the footsteps are still surrounding us. The planchette moves to the center and we say bye again. Again, it moves to no, then back to the center. This time we all say it together, my friend's idea, and slowly, agonizingly slowly, moved the planchette to the word goodbye. We were relieved and took off running to the cars, which were parked at the entrance of the cemetery on the side of the road. Me and a buddy jump into my truck, and I hear my friend scream something about not being able to find their keys. She checks the ignition, her pockets. All our friends check the car and their pockets. No keys. Everyone else loads back into the truck, and we speed the 3 miles down the road to my dad's house. My friend searches her purse and pockets for the keys again, and again we couldn't find them anywhere. Eventually, someone takes her home, and she says she'll get her spare and get a ride back to her car in the morning. We were all too scared to go back and look that night. The next day, my friend searches the cemetery and never finds the keys, even in broad daylight. We hadn't walked around a whole lot, and where we used the Ouija board was very close to where we had parked our cars. Me and several friends scoured the entire cemetery over the next week or so and never did find them. My friend said she was 100% positive that they were left in the ignition when she got out of the car. It's where I left mine, and a common practice in the area where I'm from, which, like I said, is pretty rural. This was by far my scariest, but not the only, Ouija board experience that I have. I'm a single mother of 5 adult sons. When they were teenagers, we lived in a century home, beautiful and large with plenty of room for my brood. I should mention, our house was the house that all their friends congregated to. There were rarely nights on weekends and summers that we had less than 6 occupants. I tell you this to try and make you understand that these stories I'm about to tell are the truth and are corroborated by many people. When we first moved in, everything was nice and quiet for a number of months. Then slowly, activity progressed. My sons and I were all having unexplained happenings. They didn't tell me for almost a year because they didn't want to scare me. My first experience was being woken up at around 3 a.m. At first, I was in a half-wake, half-sleep mode. What woke me was a very loud noise coming from upstairs. It sounded like the boys were rearranging furniture, very heavy furniture. Loud scraping, so loud that I was sure they were scratching the wood floors. I instantly became furious and marched upstairs ready to bust some butts. When I got to the top of the stairs, all was quiet and dark. I started opening bedroom doors only to find all the boys sleeping soundly. I thought, wow, that was a vivid dream. To my chagrin, it happened a couple of months later, and became more and more frequent until it was almost a weekly event. I was speaking about this with my neighbor and she got a funny look on her face. I asked her what was wrong. She said, "I don't want to scare you, but when my sister, who's clairvoyant, was over, she looked up at that window, pointing to one of the boys' rooms, and said, 'She has company.' I asked her what she saw, and she said she saw a man and a woman in old-timey clothes looking back at her. At some point, I decided I wanted to share my experiences with my sons. When I did, they all broke out with their own stories. Some of them had been touched, some just heard noises or felt their beds being shaken. Here are a few more memorable ones in my mind. We being myself and 7 or 8 teenagers filling up every square inch of the place, were all just visiting and half-watching Family Guy. My youngest decided he was tired and wanted to go up to bed. Away he went, only to return a short time later with pale skin and wide eyes. He said that he had closed his bedroom door and gotten into the top bunk. That's when he heard the door handle turn, heard the door open and shut again, and then felt someone sit on the bottom bunk. He figured it was his brother, and leaned over the bunk and yelled something trying to scare him. He said he froze because there was no one there. He was completely alone, hence the wide eyes and pale skin. He truly looked like he'd seen a ghost. One morning I woke up to find my boys and one of their friends sleeping everywhere in the living room, which was not allowed in our house. I woke up my second eldest and asked what the deal was. He said they couldn't sleep upstairs because something was opening and closing all the doors, all night. He said they'd wake up and prop things in front of the doors to keep them from slamming, only to be awoken up again by the same slamming sound. He said, "Ma, those ghosts keep moving the stuff we put in front of the doors. We decided to sleep down here." I couldn't blame them. There are so many stories, but I'll just tell one more. My oldest subsequently joined the Marine Corps, and on his month-long furlough after his Iraq tour, he had a very creepy encounter. He said he was laying on his stomach and reading from his laptop when he felt something sit on the bed. He said he looked over and saw the indentation of a person sitting there, and said out loud, "F ghosts." A second later, he said he was being pushed into the bed. He spoke in the name of Jesus, and it got off of him. My final straw was on Halloween night. I was at the computer in the dining room, home alone. I felt something behind me. I turned and heard my name being said in an awful and sinister voice, and then the sound of something large falling down my staircase. It was so loud that I thought I'd find a broken dresser at the bottom, but nothing was there. I searched upstairs and outside for the cause of the crash, but nothing. I had my pastors and the elders of my church come bless my property and my home. There's been no strange activity since that day. I no longer live in that house, but one of my sons bought it. The house is still clean. A couple of years ago, I worked at a hospital as security, and part of security duties for the second shift was to lock all doors downstairs in the basement of the hospital. The type of things down there ranged from offices, supply rooms, bathrooms, and the morgue. We would also have to check the refrigeration temp inside the morgue to make sure it was running properly, but that's not important. So one night I go down to the basement, which is basically a big rectangle, locked all the doors, and just as I was going to make a right to take the stairs up, I noticed someone walk out of the corner in what looked like blue scrubs. They took about 5 steps into one of the doors I had locked. They didn't open the door or anything, just walked right through. As security, I couldn't just brush it off because recently we had people steal from the supply room, so I had to check it out, especially since it was after hours. As I walked up to the door, I immediately got goosebumps because this specific door was 1, an automatic locking door that can only be accessed by ID clearance, and 2, I didn't see the individual pull out an ID, which you have to get in. You pull out the ID, scan, and wait for the green light to pop up to open the door. I literally just saw someone take about 5 steps into the door like it was open wide, which it wasn't. The door automatically locks and closes itself. I think to myself, well, if someone accessed the door after hours, they aren't allowed to, so this might be the person that's stealing stuff. If a nurse or someone needs to go to the supply room, they call security, and security escorts them because of stealing incidents. So I pull out my ID, scan it, and open the door. I walked in and saw nobody. Then I opened all the closet doors to confirm that nobody was hiding, and then immediately got the F out because I was 100% sure that I had just seen a ghost. Later that night, I got a call from the ER department to escort a nurse down to the supply room. When I escorted her down there, into the supply room and told her what I had seen, she shuffled through some boxes in the supply room and pulled out the same exact blue scrubs that I had seen the ghost wearing. Except they weren't scrubs. They were the blue gowns that patients wear inside the hospital. So what I had actually seen that night was a patient's ghost walking around the basement. After this experience, I definitely believe in ghosts and the afterlife. To this day, I kick myself for not looking at the cameras that night. This happened to me when I was in high school. I was at my friend's house at the time, who lived in an apartment building. She had a neighbor who lived upstairs, and was a few years younger than us, who we hung out with when I visited my friend's apartment. On this specific day, my friend's neighbor mentioned that she had a Ouija board, and asked if we wanted to use it with her. We both agreed, as I personally didn't think Ouija boards were actually paranormal, and thought it was a myth. We went into a garage area of the apartment building and put our fingers on the planchette. For the first few hours, nothing really even happened. Eventually, we had movement on the planchette and started asking questions to this spirit, who would answer us. I forgot who, but someone asked if the spirit was trying to communicate with anyone. Interestingly enough, it spelled out my name. I was skeptical, and thought it was one of my friends messing with me, so I asked what its name was. It then spelled out my grandmother's name, who died 6 months before this Ouija board encounter. I started getting a little uncomfortable, as my grandmother's name is in another language, and my friends did not know this language, nor have I ever told them what her name was. They wouldn't even know how to spell it either. Weirded out, I asked what my grandmother wanted. She started spelling out URGR, and then the planchette started going in weird circles, and even going off of the board, and wasn't spelling out anything that made sense. So I asked for further clarification, and then just "You are great" popped up. This will be important later, so keep that in mind. Anyway, at that point I thought it was just one of us moving it weirdly, so I said goodbye. A few days later, my grandmother's husband, my grandfather, suddenly passed away. It was unexpected, as he was in great health, and it was right before Christmas, and he was so excited for Christmas. As I was at his funeral, I remembered sitting there and thinking about the Ouija board, and that's when it hit me. When my grandmother initially tried to spell out something that started with GR, I realized that grandfather starts with GR. But then the planchette had moved around so weirdly when my grandmother couldn't spell out the rest of the word, as if something had been stopping my grandmother from completing the word and warning me. The next few months were hell, as I started blaming myself, and was convinced that I had somehow contributed to my grandfather's death by using this board. It got to the point that I became suicidal, and the scariest part is, my thoughts felt as if they were not my own. As if something were trying to lead me toward taking my life, as they were very dark. I can't explain it, as it could have been guilt, but I felt like something was watching me all the time and felt a strange presence in the next few months after using the board. There's also the fact that the night of when I used the Ouija board, I was in the bathroom and I was underneath some lights. I had a strange sensation and felt that I needed to walk away, but right when I did, the lights shattered and would have injured me if I had been standing underneath. I eventually confessed to my mother about the Ouija board experience, and right when I did, I felt a giant weight lift off of my shoulders. The negative and dark thoughts were slowly disappearing, and I started to not feel the dark presence anymore when I overcame these thoughts. However, I was still wondering if the spirit that I had contacted was even really my grandmother. I also wondered if I was imagining this dark presence and the dark thoughts that I had had. Fast forward, I was at an overnight event at my school and another friend brought a Ouija board. I decided to use it one more time with this friend and try to get some answers. At one point, the Ouija board said that it was trying to contact me specifically. When we asked who it was, it then started spelling out D-E-V. We started panicking, but then it spelled out to a word that I forgot. I dismissed it and thought it was nothing, but my friend decided to look up the word. A few weeks later, she told me that the word meant devil in another language. It was then confirmed to me that it may not have been my grandmother who was contacting me the first time. There's also the fact that there may have been something that was trying to get to me and did not have good intentions. To this day, I am convinced that this spirit only tried to warn me about my grandfather so that when he passed, I would have felt guilty. By feeling guilty, I was more vulnerable to the spirit's influences, to the point that I would almost take my own life. I do not know if this is what actually happened, but it's the only logical explanation that I have. "10 years ago, when I was 14, myself, my cousin, and a friend all had what I can only describe as a demonic experience on Halloween. I wanted to see if anyone else has had anything similar happen or knows what this could have been. So, Halloween 10 years ago, the three of us decided it would be scary to walk through the woods nearby where I lived. I knew my way around well, as I had grown up going there. We were all walking along chatting as we approached the middle of the woods. By a hollowed-out tree, I see a yellowish glow. I stopped where I was, and my cousin and friend also stopped. I just stared at this glow as it got brighter, and they did too. We all glanced at each other with a WTF look on our faces. I'm literally thinking I'm imagining things or something like that, but they both confirmed that they were seeing the same exact thing that I was. In the glow, a young girl appeared. She looked to be about 8 years old and appeared to be dressed in Victorian-era style clothing and had pigtails hanging down on either side of her face. She started off looking quite washed out in color and kinda transparent. She became more of a solid-looking shape, and the glow got brighter. As we're watching this, we're all whispering and confirming that we are indeed seeing it. As the glow in the girl became more prominent, I went from feeling normal and in disbelief to feeling uneasy, then fear and dread, then finally like we needed to get out of there and that our lives were possibly in danger. I can put into words all the feelings I felt, but none of them are good enough, and I've never felt anything like it. I could tell my cousin and friend felt it too. The glowing thing then moved closer to us. There were no footsteps, no sounds, no nothing. It then looked and felt as if it were dashing at us, and it was literally so close in front of us I shouted, "Run!" We all grabbed hands and sprinted past it toward the main road where there was lots of light. We stopped briefly as we turned, and couldn't see anything, and then suddenly it was there again. It was fast, and we could all see this glowing person-like shape rushing toward us. Again, we ran as fast as we could until we could see the main road. I glanced behind, and it wasn't far away at all. I grabbed my cousin and friends again and started pulling them down the steep hill as the main road was at the bottom of it. We stumbled and half fell down this hill, but all managed to keep getting to our feet. I'm sure this was down to pure terror and adrenaline. We got onto the path by the main road and looked up at the woods, and the glow was there, clear as day, at the top of it. It wasn't coming toward us at all anymore. We caught our breath and were ranting about it to each other, all confirming again that we had actually seen and felt what we did. The glow was still at the top of the hill. It was as if there was an invisible boundary that it couldn't cross. We turned away from the woods, and when we looked back, it had moved behind a tree. It was almost as if it stood there watching us, trying to hide. We stood at the bottom of the hill, by the main road, looking at it for about 30 minutes, maybe longer. Eventually it was gone, and I saw a slight glow in the distance of the woods, followed by nothing. We returned about a week later because we all knew what we had seen, but we wanted to check to make sure that there was no possible light that could be shining there. It was literally pitch black. No light was visible, and we retracted our exact steps. I was working at this hospital called Warren General in Warren, Pennsylvania, about 90 minutes east of Erie, Pennsylvania. I worked night shift. I'm a travel RN, so this was one of the hospitals that I traveled to. One night my floor was slow, so I got pulled down to the CCU to work. Well, that night my patient rang her call bell at 3 o'clock in the morning and she asked me, "What does she want?" I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "The nurse keeps coming in here and standing there in that corner," and she points to the corner behind the door. So I was like, "Who, Ashley?" That was the nurse I was working with, and I pointed to her because she was sitting at the nurse's station on the computer, and the woman says, "No, the other one." Well, there was no other one. It was just us two. And FYI, the patient was a woman in her 50s and didn't have any history of mental illness and was not taking any meds that would make her hallucinate. I kind of laughed, and I was like, "It's just us." And she just stares at me, so I say, "Okay, if she does it again, just yell for me and I'll come right in." Her room was 8 feet in front of the nurse station. About half an hour goes by, and she yells, "See, there you go again." I got up, started walking. I hear the bathroom door shut. It had been cracked open just a little bit to give her dark room a little light. I walk in and I say, "See, you're dreaming. There's no one else in here." She says, "No, she went in the bathroom." I open the door and the lights are still on, but no one is in there. Looking confused, I say, "What does she look like?" Because I thought that someone was messing around. It's too dark to tell. I can tell it's a woman, but she's so dark that I can't really make her face out. When she says that, I get a little weirded out. But the night ends and I forget about it. 3 months go by. I get pulled back down to the same unit. I have the same room as before. This time a man in his early 60s in the patient room. Nice guy, alert and oriented and very polite. Night is going good. It's about 3 a.m. and his call light goes off, which means he needs something. So I walk in and he says to me, "You are my nurse, right?" And I nod my head. And he says, "Well, why does that lady keep coming in here and standing in that corner? What is she doing?" What? I almost crapped my pants instantly. This was 3 months later. Same room, same thing. I said to him, "Honestly, I think it's a ghost, sir." And he laughs. And I say, "You're not the first person to say that." I started telling everyone about it, and then I find out that the entire second floor has a nurse that's seen every once in a while. I guess in the 1990s, a nurse who worked there committed suicide. She shot herself to death in the second floor bathroom. About 2 years ago, my Nana brought home a Ouija board that she found at a yard sale. I have always been a true believer in the paranormal, and it's always been one of my peak interests. I have heard or read enough stories and watched enough shows to know not to mess around with a Ouija board, and quite frankly, they kind of freaked me out, so I wanted nothing to do with it. My Nana, on the other hand, doesn't believe in the paranormal whatsoever, and thought it would just be a fun game for myself, my brother, and the oldest of my 2 cousins. I left it on the dining room table for days before she made me put it away. I ended up sliding it under my bed in hopes of just forgetting about it. My brother, 11, and my cousin, 12, bugged me about it constantly because they wanted to play with it and I wouldn't let them. I tried to explain to them that it wasn't just a game, and that it shouldn't be messed with, but they were preteen boys who couldn't help but do things that they shouldn't. One day after I got home from work, the boys were there and I had this sneaking suspicion that they played with it. I looked under my bed and it was there, but I just had this odd feeling. That's when I went downstairs and interrogated them about it. At first, of course, they denied it, but I saw right through them until they finally admitted that they had in fact played with the board. I asked them if they had said goodbye when they were done, and they claimed that they did. My cousin likes to over-exaggerate stories big time, and makes things up to be overly dramatic, so when he told me about a couple of things that supposedly happened, I didn't believe him at all. Also, they were boys who liked to mess with each other, so I assumed that's what was occurring. Anyways, a couple of nights later I got in bed, and as I lay there trying to fall asleep, I got this feeling like I was being watched. I looked over at my closet, which has 2 sliding doors, and I noticed one of the doors is slightly opened, leaving a small space. It creeped me out for some reason, so I turned and faced the other way, trying to ignore everything and just fall asleep. I finally passed out, and the next thing I know I'm woken up by what felt like someone or something hitting me in the back of the head. I was lying on my back, so the back of my head was fully on my pillow, which made it even weirder. And it wasn't a light hit either. It scared me so bad. I was shaking. I look around my room and I don't see anything, but then all of a sudden I hear my floor creaking like someone is walking around my bed. After laying there for a good little while, I finally got the courage to get up and grab my phone and book it to my living room. I sat and tried to calm down. I could still feel a tingling, pulsating sensation at the back of my head. I turned on my phone and realized it was 3 in the morning. I called my boyfriend, now husband, with tears streaming down my face from being so freaked out. He didn't pick up, and I swear I called him another 15 to 20 times before I finally gave up. I sat in the chair until my Nana got up around 6. I didn't tell her what had happened, because I knew she wouldn't believe me and would say I was acting stupid. After she got up, I had breakfast and then called my boyfriend again, and he finally answered. He told me he had his phone on silent mode so that he didn't know that I had been calling. I gave him so much crap for this, let me tell you. I told him what had happened and he felt so bad and felt like an idiot. He told me he would have come over in a heartbeat to comfort me and was so apologetic. Later that day, he came over and we took the Ouija board to a junkyard to get rid of it. My husband is the only one in my family that knows what happened, and I didn't experience anything again after I got rid of the Ouija board. So once again, moral of the story, Ouija boards should not be messed with. I live in a forest outside of a large Croatian city. I consider myself lucky to live in a place so remote and peaceful, yet so close to civilization. It especially came as a blessing during the quarantine. That being said, living in this forest has its quirks that make you question how much of a heaven the place you call home actually is. I moved here around 5 years ago, but it was today that I finally discovered the dark truth about its past. I'd like to share what I found, but let's take it back first, to the day when I realized that there might be something more to this place than the human eye can perceive. It was a hot summer day a few years ago, and I was walking my dogs through the forest. I had recently discovered a new path that I had never walked before, as I didn't know how long it was and how much time that it would take to walk through. This time, though, I had the whole day for myself, so I finally gave in to my curiosity and ventured into the unexplored area. It seemed fairly normal, although it was way more quiet and seemed more isolated than the rest of the forest paths. The path was surrounded by steep valleys on both sides, which ended in deep wooded areas at the bottom, probably inhabited only by animals, or at least nothing human. I stopped for a moment to give my dogs water and take a short break. I was sitting on the ground while they drank, and I was enjoying the calming sounds of the forest, until the peaceful atmosphere was sharply interrupted by something downright disturbing. I heard a human voice shouting from the bottom of a valley. But not just any voice. It was my voice. And it was calling my name. I stayed there for a couple more moments, just to make sure that I was hearing it right, as it didn't make any sense. Sure enough, it was calling my name, again and again. I got up and ran home as fast as I could. Every step of the way I felt watched, and more paranoid, as if I were being chased. I did my research at home. I wanted to find an explanation as to what had happened to me. It fit the profile of a skinwalker. I don't feel entirely confident to conclude that that's what it actually was, though. As I already said in the beginning, I'm from Croatia, and I don't know enough about skinwalkers to know if they can be found here, if they even exist. Anyhow, that possibility didn't make me any more comfortable. Unfortunately, it wasn't a single event. This was only the beginning of strange happenings for me in that forest. I have a hard time falling asleep, so I usually go out for a nightly stroll up and down the street before I go to bed. My street is surrounded by forest, but it didn't used to scare me. I was used to the way the darkness looks material in the trees, and I made peace with being exposed by the streetlights to anything that lurks within. After what I encountered, though, I can't shake the feeling of being watched, and the sound of leaves rustling as if someone were walking in there in the dark, every night that I take that walk. I will also sometimes hear my name being called from a distance, just like that summer day. I play it safe, so I casually stroll back into the house when it gets too intense, when I feel surrounded by invisible eyes preying on me, just waiting for the right moment. You have to play it cool. Don't let them know you know that they're there. Seem completely unbothered. Now, that skinwalker theory had stuck with me for a long time, even though I can't prove it. I feel like I was being stalked by one. That wasn't until today, when I found out about something I think I should have known a long time ago. I always knew my forest is an unusual place. Part of it is a memorial park, full of strange monuments. I thought those were just there for soldiers that died during the war, and didn't think much else of it. I'm currently in my 4th year of high school, and we're learning about the World Wars, so that sparked some curiosity to find out more about the forest. What I found left me in shock. Basically, horrible war crimes had taken place exactly there, and the ground is filled with mass graves of the executed and tortured soldiers. According to the official site of the Memorial Park's virtual museum, it is the quote-unquote site where the worst mass war crimes in the modern history of the city of Zagreb were committed. I was shocked, to say the least. Finding that information left me completely speechless. You'd think I had finally gotten my conclusion, an answer to what it is that haunts my forest. Instead, it just left me with even more questions. I don't know what entity spies on me, or what its intentions are. I don't even know if it's an individual, or if there's more of them working in unison against something that doesn't belong. The only thing I know for sure is the way it feels. In some way, my concerns seem justified. I most likely am not the only thing roaming these woods at night. The forest feels heavier now. The weight of the truth combined with the burden of worry leaves the night air tingling with tension. Oh, how the tables have turned. The presence I worry about the most right now is me. I might actually be the one disturbing the peace of things that were quietly buried in the soil. As much as I don't know their intentions, they also don't know about mine. I wish there was a way to make it clear that I approve of their ownership of these grounds, that I am okay with being merely a guest, privileged by their peace. So until further notice, I am the one haunting this place. My first paranormal encounter occurred on October 31st of 2009. A week prior to Halloween, we had made plans. We heard rumors that the cemetery above our neighborhood was haunted. Some of the stories sounded legit, others sounded highly exaggerated, so me, my cousin Dustin, William, and Tommy decided to go find out for ourselves on the perfect day, Halloween night. Jason didn't find out until the day we were going up there. We weren't planning on having him go with us because he would always get scared so easily, but he begged and begged to let him come, so we said okay. Halloween night, we had a small campfire at my aunt's house that was in her backyard. After sitting there until 11:30 p.m., we grabbed our flashlights and homemade medkits. We walked from my aunt's backyard up through the woods on a big hill until we reached the cemetery. William and Jason argued for a minute about who was going in which direction to check out which parts of the cemetery. Jason didn't want to go with Tommy because he was worried that Tommy would scare him, as Tommy had a reputation for doing such. My two cousins and I began making our way through the cemetery, and we didn't notice anything until we got near the mausoleum at the top. We started getting chills, and then we started hearing the voice of an elderly man saying, "Get out. I want you out." As we moved forward, the voice became more aggressive. "Get the hell out of here. I want you out." I shined my flashlight around, and standing between a tree and the mausoleum was an old man. The three of us just stood there in shock. He looked to be in his 80s. He had a black suit on, glasses, and he just looked down at us with this angry glare. His mouth wasn't moving, but we kept hearing what we assumed was his voice. The three of us slowly backed up and started walking down to the lower part of the cemetery to meet back up with Jason and Tommy. What we didn't know at the time was that Jason and Tommy were on the other side of the cemetery heading to the upper part of the cemetery to find us. We got midway through, and there was an area in the middle with 3 tall spruce trees, and we saw 4 shadow figures moving back and forth between the trees and the tombstones. It wasn't like they were running, more like gliding, and they would just disappear behind the stones and the trees. By this time, we began to hear voices again. We just wanted to get out of there, but we weren't going to leave Tommy and Jason behind. As we were walking, we heard them screaming in pure fear. We immediately started running back up towards the mausoleum, calling out to them, and I started waving my flashlight as we were running. I look up ahead, and I can see them running toward us. When the 5 of us got together, Jason was crying. I asked what happened, and Tommy just kept insisting that he swore he didn't do anything. I look over at Jason and ask him. He was crying so hard he could barely speak. I gave him a quick shake, and he said something grabbed me and pushed me down. Then Tommy said, "We were looking around the mausoleum looking for you guys, and all of a sudden Jason's on the ground kicking and screaming." He proceeded to say that he saw an old man standing at the tree line about 20 feet away, telling them to get out. Jason stood there shaking and crying. I rolled up his sleeve, and we shined our lights and saw a red handprint on his forearm. Dustin said, "Okay, that's it. We're done. Let's get out of here." We started walking down, and we saw the old man standing in the middle of the gravel path, only this time he looked worn down. We immediately ran the other way, and there he stood again, right in front of us, and this time he looked even worse. He slowly pointed at us and said, "Get out, you dirty little shits." I screamed at him that we were leaving, and we hauled ass out of the cemetery, down through the woods, back into my aunt's backyard. We sat on her porch, trying to process what had just happened. It was almost 1 a.m., so we decided to head in for the night. William and I went into my house, and my dad was sitting on the living room couch. He asked where we had been. We told him that we were up in the cemetery, and that it was indeed haunted, and we informed him of everything that we had seen. He, of course, didn't believe us. He told us that we just needed to go and get some rest. We stayed up until 3 a.m. and began even questioning our sanity. I had suspicions that there's more to this world than just us, but William was a complete skeptic. He didn't believe in anything paranormal. Until that night. About a month before I wrote this on here, my dad and I were hanging out and he brought up that Halloween night, and as we were talking about it, his demeanor changed. He asked, "When you said that the cemetery was haunted and I said that it wasn't, I lied. It is haunted. I know about the old man up there, because both your mother and I saw him when we were kids." I asked if he knew anything else about him, who he was, or why he was there, but he didn't. He said that all he could tell me was that he does not want anyone up there, especially at night. So I'm a week out of the hospital after spending 2 weeks in there with COVID-19 and pneumonia. I have a lot of serious health issues, and barely survived my stay, but at the end of my stay, I was woken up at about 4 a.m. by the nurse coming in to give me more antibiotics and change my fluid drip. She left to get a new tube for the drip, and whilst she did that, I rolled over in my bed and saw an elderly man standing at the end of my bed with his hand on the bed at the bottom, as he was looking out the window. Initially, I thought it was one of the elderly gents on the same ward, wandering into my room again. It had happened multiple times, as they all had dementia or delirium, so I spoke to him and asked him if he was all right, but he didn't respond. I buzzed for the nurse and she came back in a rush, and the man vanished before my eyes, and I believe before the nurse's too, as she stopped and stared for a moment, before shaking her head and continuing. I tried asking about it, but she kept telling me that I must be dreaming. Every time she came back into my room, she looked at the same spot where he had been. I'm not sure what I actually did see that night, and I didn't recognize the man at all. I am a sensitive. I have seen and experienced the paranormal since I was little. My experiences range from surprising to scary and can happen anytime. I don't control it. The one thing I can count on, though, is something almost always happens to me around Halloween. I'm sure most people know that Halloween is the time when the veil between the worlds is thinnest. It's not just that day. Sometimes as much as 2 weeks, before and after Halloween, the veil is thin enough to severely affect sensitive people like myself. I have a few sensitive friends and know that some can even feel the veil as it thins. Responses to the veil range depending on sensitivity. I have experienced lucid dreaming, vivid dreams, and severe anxiety. I do have anxiety, which I have medication for. Last Halloween, I had a panic attack come out of nowhere. I was shaking and could hardly breathe for no reason. I barely made it back to the car, and I know that it was because of the veil. I don't usually have those attacks since starting my medicine, and I went back to the same mall a few months later and experienced no anxiety. I don't remember everything that happens on Halloween, so the experiences I do remember are usually among the scariest. I'll start with the ones that happened the longest time ago. That Halloween I had a few things happen to me, as expected. I can't remember them, since they didn't really stand out. This experience was more creepy than scary. It was either Halloween night or just after. I couldn't sleep, so I was playing on my phone in the dark. I decided it was time to make myself sleep, so I put my phone down. When I did, I saw a dark, cat-sized shadow jump at my face. I jerked back, thinking that my black cat had jumped up on my bed. I never felt her land on the bed, though. I looked around for her just to realize that she was asleep on the other side of my bed. She would have had to climb over me to lay there from that angle. It took me a while to get to sleep that night. The next one is my sister's experience. It happened either that same year or a little after that. She isn't as sensitive as I am, so her experiences are fewer but stand out more. She was riding home with her boyfriend from the Halloween gathering that they had gone to. It was dark, of course. When he pulled into the driveway to their house, she said that the lights landed on something large that was running on all fours. It was humanoid-shaped. He didn't see it. She told me about it, and I told her it was fine. She was inside, and I told her not to go outside again that night. Last Halloween was my most active one. It was about a week or so before it when I had my panic attack. I also had several lucid dreams, and one very vivid dream that I still cannot convince myself it was just a dream. I also saw much more than ghosts. I have a job that requires me to go to customers' houses to try and make contact with them. That was what I was doing when 2 of these incidents occurred. I can't remember if they happened on the same night or not, but it was just before Halloween. I was on dimly lit back roads in my small town. In my town, most of the back roads are dark, so I was lucky to have some extra light. I rounded a curve and my lights lit up something standing on the other side of a fence. It was a gray mass that seemed almost two-dimensional. The best way to describe it would be almost like the reports of Bigfoot. It was taller than a human, but shaped similarly. It was not Bigfoot, though. It had no definition to it. I believe it belonged to a different place. I drove faster after seeing it, and took a different road back. The next thing that I saw was very similar to the previous creature, except that it flew. I was in my own car. With the way the windshield slants, I only saw it for a moment. It was almost like a pterodactyl, but it was gray and had no definition, just like the other one. I describe it that way for lack of a better way of describing it. Obviously, I don't think we have extinct flying dinosaurs in my small town in Tennessee. These 2 creatures sound absurd, I know, and even I would have a hard time believing someone if they described them to me. My last experience of that Halloween was the most terrifying experience that I have ever had around Halloween. I was pulling into my driveway at night after getting off work. It was late, and everyone else would have gone to bed by then. It was the first time I had seen something like it, and hopefully the last. I understand why my sister was freaked out that time. A large, humanoid creature on all fours was running through the yard. I only saw it for a few seconds, but it was close. It was big, maybe twice the size of our chocolate lab. Once we passed each other, I didn't see it again. Needless to say, I made a mad dash into the house and wouldn't let the dogs out to use the bathroom. In 2017, I was in Northern Ireland for a college field trip. My religious studies class was visiting stone circles to focus on religious geography. On this particular day, it was normal, cloudy, and we were enjoying learning the history of the Bronze Age of Wonder, excitedly waiting to go back to the hotel to begin a new day of pub hopping. I remember the stone circles being separated from the nearby woods with a small wire fence. For some reason we were hanging around the fence, peering at the woods that lay not 20 yards away. We had yet to go into any woods during our trip, staying mainly at the sites surrounded by farmland. I remember wanting very much to go into this old forest for whatever reason. We all seemed to feel curious about it. I decided to climb over the small farm wire fence and see if there was anything interesting in the woods. These woods were different from the woods that I was used to in North America. The branches were thick, too thick to stand in. I had to bend at the waist to traverse them. The ground was covered in a soft, light brown moss broken up by tree roots. I remember quickly moving under the branches, staring at the ground as to not trip. I felt giddy, like I was a child going somewhere my parents told me not to. I felt light, and I began to pick up speed. I suddenly looked up to make sure that I wasn't about to run into a tree trunk when something made me stop in my tracks. I saw legs. Human legs. I could only see their legs, like someone was standing straight up in the trees. The branches again were too thick to stand in, but this person's legs were the only thing visible. I felt an almost animal response of fear that didn't really make any sense. I told myself that they couldn't see me because I couldn't see their face, but for some reason I felt that they knew I was there. Why would someone be out here? We were the only group at the circles, and there were no houses nearby. I looked behind me and realized that I was much farther into the woods than I had thought. I could barely see the light from the place where I had originally entered. It was so quiet. They had to have heard me approach. My only thought was, I'm closer to them than I am to the entrance. They could get me before I make it out. I was only standing there, bent over for no more than a minute, but it felt like forever. I didn't see them move, but I could tell that they were facing toward me, not away. I now really felt like I was somewhere that I wasn't supposed to be, only this time instead of giddiness, I felt nauseous. As if I were a deer and they a hunter, I turned and bolted. I flew through those trees, still bent to avoid collision. I didn't look down this time, stumbling as fast as I could, only focused on the light at the end of the trees. I felt the branches pull at my hair and clothing as I ran. I couldn't hear anything over my own breathing. As soon as I broke the tree line, I felt a weight lift. The group standing at the fence looked startled by me bursting out of the forest. I told them that I thought I had seen someone, but it almost felt wrong to talk about it. We left soon after. I have no idea what it was. Was it a person hanging out deep in the forest? Was it a fae, a spirit, the green man? All I know is that it felt otherworldly. As an 8-year-old child, I was given a porcelain doll by a very dear family friend, Miss Marion. She was all the time coming across things and giving them to me. This doll was the last thing she gave me. I was never really into dolls at all growing up, but I took the doll and placed her in my room in a small, child-sized rocking chair. The chair sat right next to my closet and dresser beside my nightlight. The doll was very pretty. She was dressed in a peach and cream colored dress with an apron and petticoats. She had little black Mary Jane shoes that, when removed, showed her delicately painted toenails. Her body was soft, only her head, forearms, and legs from the knee down were porcelain. Her lips were pink, and her dark brown hair hung in slightly frizzed and now loose curls. Her eyes were brown. Her cheeks a rosy peach color, all like mine. Miss Marion had a point of saying that the doll reminded her of me, which is why she gave her to me. From the moment that doll came into my house, things began to happen. I was always uneasy with Claire. I never wanted to touch her, and when I played in my room, it felt as if she were watching me. It wasn't anything to panic about, but I do remember feeling like if I did something wrong, she might actually tell on me. How ridiculous does that sound? The first real occurrence I remember was when I was reading in my room. Ghost stories, if you can believe that. when a musical carousel horse that sat on my dresser began to play. Not just a couple of notes, like old mechanical music boxes will do at times, but like someone just wound it up fully. I sat stunned and stared at the little horse as it moved up and down in time with the music, and then it just stopped. Not wound down, just suddenly stopped. I was a pretty brave kid. I didn't run, and I didn't tell my mom. I just let it go. The next thing that happened was the voice. For several nights, and on into these years, I was woken up by what sounded like a woman inches from my face shouting my name. I would jump and sit up and find my room empty. Those happenings died down after a few months. She then started to plague my little brother with the same thing, and now that he and I are grown and gone, she's moved on to my dad. The little things started to get to me. I'd put something in a certain place only to find it later on the floor or on my dresser, right next to Claire. All my missing items eventually turned up around her. Once a ring ended up in the pocket of her apron. Books would fall off of my shelves, and a perfume smell would sometimes fill my room. The doll itself didn't smell at all, but the air around her would. My catalyst to finally get Claire out of my room was the night I woke up after hearing thumping around near my closet. I opened my eyes, sat up in bed, and of course my eyes were drawn to the nightlight where Claire sat. As I watched, the source of the thumping became clear. The rocking chair Claire occupied was rocking on its own. I had thick shag carpet, so there's no way it was rocking just by chance. If that wasn't enough, Claire's feet, which were both turned to the side facing opposite each other, slowly straightened themselves to be both pointing directly up. This part still freaks me out 20 years later. She then turned her head, which was quite impossible to do since it was fixed to her cloth body. She looked toward me, and every music box in my room, 4 of them, started to play at once. I was paralyzed with fear. I didn't feel endangered so much as I just felt scared of what was happening. I screamed for my mom and dad. The music stopped, but Claire maintained her gaze in my direction. And this is why I hate dolls. Even after that, I couldn't get rid of Claire totally. I ended up stuffing her in a box in the back of a storage closet. She's still there as far as I know. So is the woman who now screams my dad's name in the middle of the night, and not in the kinky way. While I think she explains some of the oddities that happened in my parents' house, I don't think she's the tie to it all. This happened a couple years ago when I was working at my childhood summer camp. I've certainly gotten strange feelings around the area before, but nothing especially malevolent or frightening. My coworker and I were taking our group for a sleep out, up in some shelters about half a mile into the woods and away from the rest of the camp. I'm used to being in the woods, and I generally don't scare easily, even at night. So when I woke up in the wee hours of the morning, I set out for the latrines without a second thought. I figured it was around 4 or 5 a.m. based on a red glow on the horizon. The light fell softly through the trees, illuminating the path and the color sides of the shelters. The walk was only a few hundred yards, but felt longer with only my flashlight. I was about halfway there before I heard something behind me. Again, I know those woods. I know what most of the animals in the area sound like, from the camp's horses to the local family of black bears. Whatever this was, it was huge. Its presence seemed to close in on me from all around, and I could hear twigs snapping, vines tearing, mud squelching underfoot. I am not fast, and I knew that running on the uneven path in the dark wouldn't get me very far. So I walked. I walked like I owned those woods, slowly and deliberately until I reached the light on the side of the latrine. The presence had faded. I was even starting to feel good, confident, like I could keep going, keep walking through the dark woods until I reached the sunrise. I had to tell myself to stop, to turn where I meant to turn. I eventually returned to my shelter and fell asleep. Maybe I would have forgotten about it all if not for that sunrise. I've watched so many sunrises over the lake that I should have known better. That red light in the woods wasn't in the east, where it should have been. It was out by the western side of the pasture, blood red and a little too bright for what it was pretending to be. The more I think about it, the more it felt like I was being herded somewhere. I haven't met anyone with a similar experience, but my friends have theories from fairies to alien abduction. I'm not sure I believe that, but I'll never go to that part of the woods alone again. Two years ago, I was hanging around with a group of mates in a small forest. Now, we've done this before more than once, and never really had anything weird happen except on two separate occasions. The first encounter that we had was a weird formation of stars slowly moving around in the sky in a triangle, and within a span of 2 seconds going incredibly fast and moving out of our view. All 7 of us saw this, so I know that it wasn't just my imagination. Now, the second encounter freaked us out the most. This happened at exactly the same location as where we saw the star formation. We were just casually hanging around in the midsummer when around 2:30 out of the blue I saw someone standing near us. I should point out that he was standing behind one of my friends who I had just talked to about 3 seconds before. Everything about this guy struck me as off-putting. I should also point out that it was about 30 degrees Celsius at this time, but this guy was wearing clothes that you would wear in Siberia during the winter. He also wore sunglasses despite it being nighttime. The moment that I saw him, I instantly felt an intense sensation of dread. The others felt this as well. I asked him what he was doing here, and he just said, listening. After he said that, he moved a couple meters, but there was something really wrong with the way that he moved, as it looked like this guy glided over the ground. Because he got closer, I told him to stay back, and he just looked at me. In that moment, my fight or flight was kicking in hard, and I got the feeling that this guy was a genuine threat, so I got ready to defend myself if he attacked us. But just a second or two after, he looked at me again and just vanished. Like we were all looking at him, and one moment he was there, and the other, he was just gone. After our initial confusion, we decided that we should book it out of there, and we just ran as fast as possible out of the forest. Just a few notes. We didn't use any substances that could have influenced what we experienced. We didn't consume any drugs, alcohol, or anything else. We also remember quite well what happened that day. We're also well known in that forest, and because it's quite small, we have been everywhere in there, and never have we found any signs of homeless people, or anything like that. So for a little background info, I'm a 34-year-old female, my husband is a 35-year-old male, and our 2 daughters are 9 and 10. We moved into a house built in 1900, back in October of 2014. The following year, in 2015, I had quit my job to stay home with my youngest, then 4, and to be available for school runs for my then 5-year-old who had just started kindergarten. Fast forward about a month into the school year of October 2015. One day after I dropped my kindergartner off at school, I took my youngest for a walk through a very old cemetery around the corner from our house. The cemetery is closed to new graves. Many of the tombstones date back to the late 1700s into the 1800s. The autumn foliage was beautiful. I even took a few pictures. My daughter had never been in a cemetery before, and was on cloud 9. She's weird and morbid like me. She was running around inspecting the graves, asking a million questions, and as she sometimes does, she informed me about some of the history about specific graves and the people who were buried. She has a tendency to make up stories about things that she sees that have happened, that turn out to be facts later on. I'm not claiming that she's psychic, but she definitely has my bloodline in her. We went home, and within a couple of days, weird things started happening. It started out small, like I would feel as if someone had brushed by me walking or something like that, but no one was there. Whenever I was in the basement doing laundry, I started feeling like someone was watching me. Then I started thinking I heard whispers or commotion coming from areas of the house where no one was at. I was also going through a bit of severe depression at the time, so at first I thought I was just going crazy. Then, one evening, I was sitting on the couch with my husband watching TV, and in the corner of the room we both saw and heard something dark and shadowy fall from the ceiling and slam on the floor. I jumped, he jumped. We both looked at each other, and he got up to check and see what it was. But once again, like all the other incidents so far, nothing was there. It was at that time that I confided in him about the brushes, whispers, and commotion. He then informed me that he had heard things too. Like, he would be upstairs in the shower and thought he heard me come home with the kids, the front door open, and then talking, only to find out that no one was home when he came downstairs. He just didn't think anything of it, so he never said anything. At this point, I realized that it wasn't in my head, and that our house was likely haunted. It is what it is. Then, a few nights later, I woke up suddenly in the middle of the night, maybe around 3 a.m. I got up because I felt wide awake. So I left my room and went out to the hallway when I suddenly noticed my youngest daughter on the first landing going down the stairs. I called out to her, "What are you doing, baby?" She looked up at me with the most frightened face I have ever seen, and she said, "I heard you calling me downstairs." Chills ran through my entire body, and I told her, "Okay, well, I'm right here. Why don't you come sleep in the bed with me?" She ran back up the stairs. The next morning after I dropped my oldest off at school, I called my mom. Well, I don't know how to put it exactly, but basically a modern-day witch and also familiar with hauntings and such. So she tells me what I need to do, and to come over and get supplies. The whole thing basically consisted of putting crystals behind all the doors in the house, spreading Himalayan salt across doorways, going outside, and also spreading the salt around each corner of the house and blessing it. And then finally, saging the entire house. I'm very familiar with saging, as I've done it before. Everything is going fine until the saging comes. I get a fire-safe ashtray, fill it up with dried sage, light it, and begin the process starting from the upstairs, working my way down. My youngest is with me during this process. I get through the whole house and down to the basement when suddenly the ashtray explodes in my hand. Literally, it exploded. It freaked me out and my daughter. I send her upstairs and I clean up the mess. Meanwhile, the entire time, I feel like someone is watching me. At that point, I immediately called my mom and told her what had happened. She then decided that she would come over and resage the house. We got to talking and trying to figure out what was going on, what caused this sudden haunting after a year of living there. We came to the conclusion that it was likely many factors. The veil is, after all, its thinnest during the month of October, Samhain, which basically means the connection to our world and the supernatural grows stronger during this time. I've always been susceptible to the supernatural since childhood. That's another story. And my depression likely brought out anything that was laying dormant. And that my youngest daughter possibly brought something back with her from our cemetery trip just before all this started happening or awakened something when she was there. After that, everything calmed down and basically went back to normal. On Halloween that year, just a few days after the saging and whatnot, we were with a group trick-or-treating and my friend told me to tell everyone about what was going on. The mass consensus was that we should burn the house to the ground, but that was of course just a joke. We did not, and virtually nothing has happened since. This was one of the most frightening moments of my life. My best friend at the time, my brother, his friends, and my friend's boyfriend all went to our local abandoned house, which we call the Witch's Circle, to go ghost hunting. Now, this little abandoned house is actually in a national park called Little Basin Creek Reservoir. But there's actually a story behind this house, which I don't know how much of it I believe. It's said that on Halloween night in the 50s, two guys brought their girlfriends out for a sacrifice. I've gone to the archives, done tons of research on this, and can't find anything to verify this information. This Halloween, when we went out there, we were clearly the only ones present. Our cars were the only vehicles there. You have to drive right past town a little ways and head out a dirt road to get there, and there's only one spot for parking, so we would be able to see if any others were there. As we start making our walk down the trail to the house, I'm holding my best friend's hand. We walked under a tree while the entire time I'm staring at the house and not paying attention to my surroundings like I should be in a dark wooded area. A small branch from the tree that we're all walking under at the time falls and lands horizontally at my feet. I didn't see this happen, but my friend and my brother did. They stopped me to look before stepping over the severed branch. I should have taken its warning and not kept going, but I did. As we got further along and closer to the house, now it's not a super long walk to the house, maybe 120 feet from the entrance, we all stood talking quietly amongst ourselves, and then we all heard a very high-pitched scream coming from the backyard. We stopped in our tracks, and I ran back towards the cars. I've never been more terrified. Ever. It's a sound that I will never be able to erase from my memory. That high-pitched death shriek. There's no way I can debunk this, as we were the only ones out there and it definitely wasn't the sound of an animal. Especially because it sounded like a human female. I haven't been back there since. This experience left me pretty shaken up for a while. To begin, I was a fairly depressed and antisocial 15-year-old in high school, and on weekends I'd go and stay with my older sister in her apartment to get away from my parents and finally just relax. During this time, I'd gotten into studying astral projection, and I'd always been interested in the paranormal, as my mom and I had experienced things in our house, and my mom claimed that she could see the spirits. Anyway, one day after some reading, I decided to take the bus over to Toys R Us, where they still to this day sell Ouija boards to kids. I bought one of the silly glow-in-the-dark ones. My sister and I were really excited to start using it. Within a few minutes of putting our hands on the planchette, it began moving in a circle. Our first introduction was a little girl named Sarah. We end up chatting with this little spirit all night. Then, it turns into every single weekend. We begin to feel almost addicted to the board, always going to chat with Sarah. It was a long time ago, but I remember her saying that she was from the 1800s. She'd be so excited to talk every time we showed up. The planchette would spin in circles all over the board. We could even take our hands off of it, and it would continue to move. The addiction to the board goes on for months. Finally, one day we decide to ask Sarah to physically show us that she exists. We ask for a sign, and a strong breeze shoots straight into my ears so hard that I jumped back from the board. There was no AC on, no windows open, and no fans in the room. From here on, things get odd, and Sarah says that she is attached to me. I started getting an off feeling, and I ask, "Are you really Sarah, or are you someone else? Some of the things you say are pretty adult for a young girl." Then the planchette began to playfully spin all over the place, ending on no. I feel a sense of almost maniacal laughter in the air. It's hard to explain, but my sister feels it too. Turns out Sarah was actually a man named Solomon. Solomon said that he loved me and that he was going to follow me. From there, we were freaked out and decided to stop using the board, but the pull was strong and it legitimately feels as if it were an addiction. After this incident, I can almost always feel someone watching me when I'm alone. I'd see the shape of a man in my head and the dark windows at night, but just for a second, enough to make me think I was losing my mind. I was frequently exploring church with my sister and was so scared from seeing figures pass by the windows and from feeling someone standing behind me that I told the preacher about our Ouija board use. He said he would pray and that I would have to ignore the spirit. Not the greatest advice. A month later, I had an odd and terrifying dream. Suddenly I'm above my body and in the den in my parents' house where I'd fallen asleep on the couch late at night. I look down at myself and then feel a presence by my body's head behind the couch near the hallway. There is a man standing there. He's wearing a black leather jacket, fitted, vintage-looking jeans, dark boots, kind of 40s, 50s-ish biker style. He was probably in his mid-20s. He had pale skin, dark, short-cut hair, and totally black eyes. He's almost attractive, if he weren't terrifying. He smiles at me eerily, and at light speed, jumps for my body. I panic and jump too, trying to get back into my body before he does. I wake up in a panic, sweating and shaking. Somehow, I eventually fall asleep at first light. And then when I awaken in the late afternoon, my mom tells me that she woke up to use the bathroom at night and fell to the ground in the living room having a seizure. I didn't know what to do or say. I was shocked. Could it have been from the paranormal encounter? Because she's a sensitive too? She used antidepressants frequently and switched them around a lot. But what a strange coincidence for it to happen that night. After that incident, life just continued on. So much of my teenage life felt negative at that age already that I just kept trekking forward, feeling someone behind me on some days not. The energy in my family's home was generally bad. Parents fighting constantly, father using drugs, mom in different phases of her bipolar. Definitely some energy a bad spirit or two could feed on. Fast forward to sophomore year in high school. I used to sit in the corner in band doing homework quietly, and one day a girl known as the school witch comes up to me. We'd maybe talked a few times, but didn't know each other very well. She simply states, "So there's a man following you, a spirit. I'm going to do a spell for you tonight to make him leave." Once again shocked, I tell her that there has been someone following me. She nods like, yes, obviously, then walks away before I can say anything else. By junior year, I'm dating a boy who lost his brother to suicide only months before we'd met. One night he calls in a panic and states that he was brutally attacked by a male spirit or demon in a dreamlike yet awake state. He said he felt someone sitting on him and could see a black spirit in the room. He called his brother's spirit to save him. He claims he felt a whoosh of energy and that his brother pushed the spirit off of his chest. He woke up really scared, saying that he'd never felt anything like it and that he'd never had negative spirit encounters before except as a small child. What scares me is that he'd randomly have episodes after this that made him not in his right mind, or almost mad. At the time, I'd felt and seen his brother's spirit twice, and it was never a hostile feeling. I felt somewhat protected while dating him because of this, but Solomon's negative spirit was something I still worried about and felt on occasion. Years go by, and I eventually become best friends with a girl whose family ghost hunts. We ghost hunt together, experience some creepy stuff, and I become less fearful. 2 years into our relationship, I get the courage to tell her psychic aunt my story, and she seeks to find out more about this spirit. She connects with him and laughs some. He's 5150, hun. He's absolutely mad. He's not necessarily evil, but he attached himself to you because he likes how easily he can scare you. He doesn't necessarily want to hurt you, but your fear gives him pleasure. In life, it seems, he was quite mentally ill. I was absolutely stunned. It all made so much sense, and how would she know this? After the talk, my best friend and her aunt tell him to F off, and to imagine a white light and to let him know he's not welcome. This seems forward, but one night I feel the presence and it angers me. Years of someone just wanting to scare me. I yell at the empty room that I'm not afraid of him and that he's not welcome. I use sage, imagine white light, and yell for him to leave. I feel a stir in the energy, almost like he's not even that angry to leave. It felt more like an annoyance at losing his fear target. From that point on, I've had the upper hand. There was one more experience with him one day at 25 while in a toxic living situation. This was 6 years after the experience with my friend's aunt. I left my body again and was excited. Finally, astral projecting as an adult. I sit up, and lo and behold, there he is, standing by the bed. But this time I shoot white light at him. He's gone in an instant. Then my toxic roommate at the time walks through the wall to grab me. I wake up. Was he trying to warn me? Does he still visit me? Can I ever make him leave for good? Sometimes I wonder if he ever felt compassion for me. It was all so strange, and I frequently meditate and banish negative spirits or energy from around me. I've shut down a lot spiritually because of these incidents. I constantly state that nothing is allowed to bother me, but I wonder if somehow he'll be there forever. It worries me sometimes, especially because he'd stated on the board that he didn't want anyone to have me. I feel confident that spiritually I am strong, but I've always wondered if there was some deeper level of banishing that I could have, or should have done, or could still do. Anyway, I wanted to share this story because it's been both such a weight and a mystery to me for so many years. I don't know what I believe anymore. Sometimes I wonder if my extremely negative state of mind drew him to my depressed teenage self. Maybe somehow I created this negative entity? I doubt that one, but it is still possible. I feel in a much better place mentally, physically, and spiritually now, so I don't feel threatened by spirits, or really believe that he is around anymore. But who knows? I sage and cleanse my place almost daily and feel it to be a safe and light space. I will say that there is still so much I don't know when it comes to all of those incidents. Back in the early 2000s when I was a kid, there was a deserted section of the local hospital waiting to be torn down and rebuilt. My friends and I thought that it would be a fantastic idea to climb onto the roof and practice our parkour skills. After about 30 minutes, one of my friends stood on a skylight and it gave out from under him. He only just managed to grab onto the ledge, which stopped him from falling in. Myself and my other friend then rushed over and grabbed his hands to start pulling him up when we noticed a little girl standing on a chair directly in the moonlight, looking up and waving. We pulled our friend to safety and quickly looked back over the side to find that the little girl was gone and the chair was on its side. We all left pretty quickly after that. All of us were shocked. We later discovered that that part of the hospital was used to treat burn victims, and a 6-year-old girl had once died there. I have not been able to stop thinking about this experience since it happened about 10 years ago. I have never felt anything like it. Myself and 2 friends went for a walk in our local forest. I tend to walk fast, so I had walked on ahead of them. I got to a certain part of the forest, and literally from nowhere, I was struck with the most overwhelming feeling of terror. It was so strong that it literally stopped me mid-stride. I froze and could not move. I was petrified. There was nothing and nobody else around. Then I get what can only be described as a certainty in my head. It couldn't be accurate to call it a voice, rather an overwhelmingly strong sense of knowing that I needed to look to my left. I did so. There was still no one and nothing there, except for a big crack in the side of the rock face that basically made for a small cave. Whatever it was, I knew that it was in that cave, but physically there was nothing to be seen. I am not easily freaked out. I cannot impress on you enough how utterly terrified that I was in that moment. And this was the middle of the afternoon. Had the next part not happened, I could have dismissed this and thought little of it. But it did happen. As I stood there unable to move, one of my friends walks nonchalantly around the corner and immediately, without me even having a chance to look at her try to move, she stops dead in her tracks and says, "Whoa, bad energy off that cave." I try to stumble out some explanation of how I am feeling, but I can't. My brain was literally scrambled by fear. A minute later, our male friend appears. Both of us women start trying to explain to him what was happening, because he felt nothing. He approached the cave to look in, and we 2 grown-ass women are begging him not to get too close to it. I was actually on the verge of tears. But again, he felt absolutely nothing. He took a long look inside and reckoned that we were both just being a bit hysterical. It was the weirdest thing. Whatever was in there was just gone in an instant the second that he appeared. I've always had an uncanny knowing that whatever it was did not intend to harm us. It just wanted us to know that we needed to walk the F away from that area, and that it was willing to harm us if it needed to. Oddly, I have such a clear image in my head of the spot where this happened, and I know that forest like the back of my hand. Over the past 10 years, I have looked for that cave and that rock face many times. I have never been able to find it again. The night of October 30th through the morning of the 31st, myself and the group that I belonged to were invited to do a live investigation with the radio station 93Q in Houston at Spaghetti Warehouse. Spaghetti Warehouse is a restaurant known as one of the most haunted places in the country, and definitely the most haunted place in Houston. Even though I knew this, I didn't do any research on the place before I went, so that I wouldn't be influenced by what I might experience. All I knew was that the place had been a pharmaceutical warehouse during the Civil War, and that a manager had died falling down the elevator shaft years ago. I arrived for the overnight around 10:30 p.m. and was locked in until 6 a.m. I started off just exploring the building and getting a sense of it. The restaurant had 2 floors and a basement. While I was exploring and setting up cameras and sound recorders, we heard something large move in the woman's bathroom upstairs. We went in and noticed that the garbage can was out of place. We moved it back to the very exact spot where it had been and left the bathroom. About 5 minutes later, we heard it move again. I went back in and noticed that the garbage can had been moved about a foot from where we had placed it back before. Obviously, I realized that something was going on, so I grabbed one of the DJs and we went in to try to capture EVPs, or electronic voice phenomenon. Basically, unexplained voices or sounds that are too low for the human ear, but able to be picked up by our sound equipment. I placed a camera down and started asking questions to try to get any sort of response or communication. After you've been on a lot of cases, you learn to trust your instincts, and you can almost feel when something is around or not right. It has nothing to do with being psychic, just trusting your intuition when your senses are heightened and on guard. That's exactly what I got. It was the strongest that I've ever felt. It was threatening, and like something was right in my face. I felt many presences before, but nothing truly uncomfortable. I remember staring blankly for a second while not speaking, then saying, "Man, I gotta sit down, I feel so drained," which I did. After about 30 more minutes, we left without noticing much else in the bathroom. About an hour or so passed, and one investigator had his voice recorder move right in front of him, and a few others saw wine glasses shake by themselves. We all witnessed faint shadows move across the windows downstairs where light from the outside would penetrate in. You would just notice darkness block out the light and then move away again. We also heard faint voices throughout the night. The whole place had a very creepy vibe, and you constantly felt like someone was watching you or around you. At about 3 a.m., I decided to take a break and sit at a table upstairs to listen to the audio that I had recorded earlier in the bathroom. Normally, I would have waited until the next day, but because we were with the radio station, they wanted some sort of evidence to broadcast when they went live at 6. But also because I felt so strong about what I had sensed, and I was eager to see if I had caught anything. I sat down and started searching for the spot on the audio where I got the weird feeling, while also keeping an eye out to notice anything unusual going on upstairs. After a few minutes, I found the spot, and sure enough, right after I said, "I need to sit down," there was a faint but clear voice. It said, "Hey, what are you staring at?" This excited me, but it was nothing compared to what I was about to experience. A few seconds later, a sixth sense told me to look up, and when I did, I clearly saw a woman in white, wearing a gown with a bonnet on her head, smoothly walk into the wall. The apparition was about 20 feet away. It only lasted a split second, but it was very clear, and I still remember it like it was yesterday. I didn't tell anyone until later so that I wouldn't influence the other investigators. At about 4 a.m., I started taking pictures of the downstairs area since no one else was around, and I planned to eventually make it down to the basement. The first floor felt calm, but there was one hallway that led to the basement that had a weird vibe to it. You felt watched. Nothing came up on the pictures, so I headed towards the hallway and the basement. The hallway was about 10 feet long, and had a door at the end where light would shine through. As I turned to enter, I saw a shadow, as if it were some sort of being, that completely blocked out the light, and was very large. It was straight ahead of my face and about 5 feet away. Again, it was only for a second, but I clearly, visibly saw a head with shoulders, arms, and a long lower body. I think I scared it as much as it scared me, because it instantly ran toward me and right by me on my left side. Every hair on my body stood up, and my camera completely shut itself off. For the first and only time, I didn't proceed further right away. I was stunned. Actually, I took a step back to collect my thoughts and fix the camera. It wouldn't work until I completely left the area. I figured it was break time and took about 20 more minutes. Later on, I went down to the basement with another investigator. For the last hour down there, we experienced cold spots and smaller things, but nothing really that unusual. After the radio show, I packed up and left Spaghetti Warehouse drained, tired, freaked out, and with the absolute certainty that there is life after death. It changes you as a person. In the Wicca religion, they say that Halloween is the day when the dead can freely roam our world. I never believed that, and thought it was always psychic BS, but I'll never doubt it again. Setting: hospital, medical surgery floor. Profession: staff nurse. This happened yesterday, and I have 2 nursing students as living proof. We basically carry those indestructible Nokia cell phones around at work. If you hit the call bell, they ring to the aide's phone first, then it bounces to my phone. Yesterday, a call bell came in from an all-female room. My phone put itself on speakerphone and answered itself. A male voice repeated on a loop with a 4 to 5 second delay, "Are you there?" At the time, I was giving a report to 2 nursing students, 1 male, 1 female. The incident happened after we had just started talking about near-death experiences. We all went white and got goosebumps. The female student said, "Well, you're haunted." It was unbelievable. The male student calmly said, "Yes, we are here." This had never happened before. Those phones don't repeat. Absolutely amazing. I went into the room later and opened the window and told him he was dead and that he needed to move on. What an experience for the students. This has never happened to me before, but I hope it happens again, and that I have the courage to do what the male student did. Let me start this off by saying that it is imperative that you stay off of the deep web. No matter what anyone tells you, no good can come from using it, and I am about to inform you as to why. I was 15 at the time. I had come home from school on a Friday afternoon ready to relax, kick back, and enjoy the short break. I had started using code about a year prior. Nothing too fancy, just basic Python, Java, HTTP, etc., and was practicing it daily. Now, I had known about the dark web before this took place. I would sometimes buy weed off of it, but that was about the extent. This particular day, however, I decided to venture further and really take a look at the dark web. I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with the iceberg diagram representing the internet's content. For those who don't know, the surface web contains about 10% of the internet's content, while the deep and dark web take up over 90%. I was ready to see what it really held. I heard stories about what goes down on the deep web, murder, inhumane torture, etc. But I didn't really believe that they were all legit, so I hopped on Tor and began to see what I could dig up. I started off by going on the hidden wiki and browsing through various websites, most of which contained illegal things such as drugs, hackers, and hitmen for hire, and lots of CP. I clicked on a random forum link, which took about a minute to load. I wish I could remember the name of it. It was a forum where people could pick a topic that they wanted to talk about, such as politics, dealing with mental health, etc. I noticed one of the topics was a pedo forum, and I don't want to even go into detail on what I saw there. There was one particular one that caught my eye. The link was all in red, while the rest were all black. It said, "Not for the weak, enter at your own risk." Curious as to what this was, I click on the link and it brought me to a forum that had only one other link on the whole page. I clicked that link, and it brought me into a chat room. I realized that nobody was saying anything in it, only sending links. This set off alarm bells in my head because I had an idea of what was on those links. I wish that I had listened to my gut feeling, which was telling me to close out while you still can. However, the ignorant, curious teen took over me, and I started setting up some protection for myself using the code that I had learned. I later realized that this amateur coding I did would not protect me from these advanced people with malicious intent. I clicked on a random link and a page loaded surprisingly fast. It looked to be another chat room. I went to type hello or something, but it wouldn't let me. I sighed and began moving my mouse to go to the previous page when a noise went off. I had received a chat. The message said, "Hello, new user. I see you have found my site. Would you like to continue?" I tried typing again, but I still couldn't. The next message sent chills down my back, and my hands were shaking. It read, "No, son, not the keyboard." I tried turning off my computer, of course, but nothing worked. Another message popped up saying, "I guess I'll take that as a no." The screen suddenly changed, and a video began playing. It was a black screen, but I could hear a deep male voice say, "Unfortunately for you, you do not have a choice." I grabbed a sticky note and put it over my webcam, and the voice on the screen said, "Ah, so we're playing games now, huh?" The video then began to change, and I realized the man was taking his hand off the camera. He was a short man, maybe 5'7" tops, but that brought me no comfort. He held up a knife and said, "Name any body part." I then for the first time noticed a cloth in the corner of the room, covering up something which I could only assume to be a body. I had had enough. I unplugged my computer and lay on the floor panting for hours until I could finally get up. I now suffer from anxiety and won't touch a computer unless I absolutely have to. My ex-fiancé and his stepmom claimed that his house was haunted. Once or twice a week when I would come over, they would be burning sage next to the door. I never thought anything of it. Connor and I would be cuddling on the couch late at night, 10 or 12 p.m., and we would hear footsteps, but we always just assumed it was his sisters waking up to use the restroom. Anyways, it was Halloween, and I decided to do a spirit box session with Connor's high-power microphone. I'd record for a couple minutes, then listen back to the recording. I did this for a half hour and got nothing. Then I began to taunt whatever it was in the house. I was claiming BS, but nothing was there. I decided to leave the microphone running for longer than normal, roughly 15 minutes instead of 5. I can't remember what I heard in the playback audio, but it was more than just Connor and my voices. I rewound it again to see if we could decipher what the voices were saying. I remember something that felt like a rush of cold as ice wind coming over me, and I couldn't talk. My left arm clenched up, as it does when I'm extremely cold. I tried to explain what was going on, but I couldn't get the words out of my mouth. Connor thought I was just messing with him and told me to stop acting and relax. He tried to force my arm to unclench, but I was able to fight his strength, which had never happened before. I started to panic, and the rest of my body curled into a tensed fetal position. He tried to get me to uncurl, but it still didn't work. I couldn't mutter anything except for Hosanna. This phrase, Hosanna, was the only word I could speak for a solid 5 minutes while this was taking place. I was honestly terrified of what was happening. What scared me was that I could not understand it. I kept saying it quietly, but getting louder the more that I said it. Connor kept asking me what it meant, and I couldn't even bring my tongue to say that, until the room became warm again. Then I was finally able to untense my muscles and sit up, and he asked me again what Hosanna meant. In Hebrew, it means, God save us, God help us, God deliver us. I was so afraid that I went home and slept with my room light on for the rest of the night. I spoke with him about the incident the following morning, and he told me that he had warned me not to mess with the spirits in the house. He did no such thing, ever. He even gave me the microphone so that I could do EVP sessions on Halloween. This is a warning. Please, please, never taunt spirits. It doesn't matter if you think they are friendly or not. They will mess you up. All this started when I was in middle school. I was young and stupid and seriously interested in the paranormal. I grew up in a religious home, and I am still religious. I have no explanation for what happened to me. I started experimenting with the paranormal with my friends. We thought it would be really cool to use a Ouija board. At first, nothing seemed to happen, but then the board started to move. We asked all the normal stupid questions like, who's there, or is anyone here? It moved really slow and steady. I was sure that my friend was messing with me. I got spooked and we threw out the board. But that is not where this story ends. Moving forward, I started having really weird nightmares. I would consistently wake up at 3 a.m. or not be able to sleep at all. I was basically a zombie throughout my entire day. There was one time when I was at home alone on FaceTime when I heard my mom yell my name. I yelled back and didn't get a response. My friend then reminded me that I was home alone. I immediately checked my whole house and no one was there. She heard the voice too, though, so it couldn't be explained. I continued hearing voices and knocks and was still unable to sleep. There was one time where I was in my room doing homework and someone pulled my hair so hard that my head actually yanked down. I got so spooked that I ran to my dad and told him what had happened. He obviously didn't really believe me. My brother started noticing weird things too, and that's when I got really uncomfortable. He and I were in my room, and I went to the bathroom. When I came out, his face was stone white. He claimed he saw a little girl run past my bedroom door. It couldn't have been me because I used the bathroom connected to my room. We don't have any other siblings. Another time I was on FaceTime again with a separate friend and I had my phone out in front of me when I walked into my bathroom. My friend asked, "What is that behind you?" And as soon as she said that, the lights shut off. I sprinted to my brother's room and of course nobody believed me again. The icing on the cake though was when I was asleep one night and I woke up suddenly. It was 3 a.m. again and I was completely paralyzed with fear. I couldn't move. All I could see was a hooded figure in all black staring at me from the corner of my room. I couldn't see its eyes. I just knew that it was looking at me. It began to float toward me, and then pressed all of its weight on my chest. I couldn't talk or move. After silently crying for what felt like forever, I finally croaked out the word Jesus, and it fled from the room through my door. After that incident, I told my mom everything about the Ouija board and the experiences, and she finally believed me. She could see how scared that I truly was and knew that I couldn't be lying. She immediately got to work and blessed me and the house. I haven't had anything that terrifying happen to me since, and I no longer live in that home. This happened to me 2 years in a row when I was young. Too young to face as much horror as I did. I was 6, and it was Halloween. I was just getting into bed when I heard an awful screeching sound coming from the hall closet. It was right by my mom and dad's bedroom, but they didn't hear a thing. which really freaked me out. I slowly got up out of bed and ran silently to the closet. I opened the door, and it took all my effort not to scream. I saw a yellow metal box. I opened it and saw the creepiest doll. It was a raggedy, ugly, old doll. Its hair was in 2 long, blonde braids. Her, I should say. I slowly picked the doll up. It screamed again, and this time I did too. From that night on, the thought of it lurked in my mind until the next Halloween, when I had another encounter with it. When everything happened again that year, I made up my mind and threw it away. The next day, I had gone into the closet to get my hula hoop, and my eye caught the yellow box. I picked it up. I opened it, and an uncomfortable chill ran down my back. The doll had returned. I couldn't get rid of her. Ever. To this day, I still know its exact location. I hold this Celtic belief, which is that on Halloween night, the veil between our world and the world of the dead is thinner. So I'm pretty spooked on Halloween. This Halloween was pretty messed up for me. Nothing had ever happened on any Halloween before this one. The house I live in right now is not haunted. Everyone feels great in it. So on Halloween night, I took a nap. Weird sleep schedule. The doorbell kept ringing because kids wanted candles and treats. I wasn't alone, so other people were answering. Between 2 of those waking up for a couple seconds before going back to sleep moments, I had the weirdest experience. I hadn't turned the light off, so I saw it very clearly. It was so bizarre. I saw 2 little girls entering my room and just running around before disappearing. There are no kids in that house, but I was like, it's just me. Then something else happened at night when I was trying to sleep. I woke up and saw someone next to my bed facing me, entirely encompassed by shadow. I thought at first, oh, it's my boyfriend, but my boyfriend left 2 days before to work. He was pretty far away. So I started to realize that it wasn't him, and I just tried to turn on the light while I was panicking. No one. That happened just before this experience. I saw a shadow walking into my room, and I thought it was my boyfriend again, except it wasn't because he was again not here. It wasn't sleep paralysis. I could move and everything. I experienced it before, and it's definitely not that. I am a security officer and I work in a low-volume hospital. I'm sitting in my office on the computer, and to the left of me is a closet door about 3 feet away. It's a small office. Out of nowhere, there are 2 very loud pounding sounds coming from inside the closet. These were full-on banging sounds, not just knocks. It shook the entire office, it was so violent. I jumped what felt like 10 feet out of my chair. It took me a minute to realize what had just happened before I actually looked inside. Of course, nothing was in there, just some old office equipment. I'm kind of in shock now. I've worked here for a year and have had some odd stuff happen, but I could always find an explanation in my head. This time, I just can't. We've had reports of odd things happening from the housekeeping and other workers. So last year I received a doll from my aunt. It was a hand-me-down that she found in storage, so I don't know its origin story. Her name is Alice. First weird note is that I immediately knew her name as soon as I held her for the first time. Anyways, originally Alice sat in my room, but one day while cleaning, I put her in my closet. After putting her in my closet, weird stuff started happening. I would hear her in there. Usually her knocking against the walls. It was so loud that my friend could usually hear it over the phone. I would get reoccurring dreams of someone named the Medicine Girl. I would often awake from these dreams in sleep paralysis. Other objects and items would go missing randomly, only to be found in places where I had not left them. My grandmother's stuffed bear, that's at least 50 years old, would move across the room and end up in places that I also hadn't left it in. I practiced witchcraft, and the plants on my altar died. All of this stopped when I moved her out of the closet and back into my room. Due to all of this, I believe that she is haunted. However, I can't find anything online about what you're supposed to do with a haunted doll, and I'd like some advice. I believe she's scared of being alone, or doesn't like being hidden, hence everything stopped when I removed her from the closet. I live in a rural, but not isolated area in the Midwest. My window is right up against the forest, which is about 50 or 60 feet away from the tree line, about 20 or so feet above ground level. I heard what I am convinced was a low, echoing humming like a song from the woods. I've heard turkey, coyote, fox, deer, squirrel, and so on before, their cries, calls, and barks. This was none of those. As I laid there in bed, as I began to concentrate on the sound, I couldn't shake the mental conclusion of, it's a woman singing. The sound persisted for about 15 to 20 seconds and then stopped, but not suddenly. After a minute or two later, it picked back up again. This continued a few more times before it actually did stop completely. The sound was distant, not quite deep into the woods, but also not at the tree line. There's a small unit of deer that sometimes sleep in a clearing in the woods around that area, but they haven't been there in a few weeks. For some context, I am very much a late-night person. I used to work graveyard shifts due to my ability to stay alert so long into the night. This is how I know what all these common and uncommon woodland creatures sound like. And no, I did not look outside of my window. My process was this: if I can't identify it, don't look for it. I still think I was right to not seek out an immediate answer. Additionally, the song was clear. Around 2013, my senior year of high school, my mom, brother, and 2 friends planned a Halloween ghost hunt type deal. We headed out to this park that was notoriously haunted. We even made sure to go at 3 a.m. to get maximum results. One friend brought her camera and got tons of orbs. Not the most solid evidence, but pretty cool regardless. My brother decides to sit on the end of the pier on the lake and do some recordings. He ends up getting the clearest, creepiest EVP I've ever heard in my life. About 2 minutes in, he asks a question. It goes quiet, and you can clearly hear a man's voice yelling out, "Don't shoot," followed by a few seconds of silence, and then an agonized groan. None of us heard this until we played it back in the car. I remember shivers running down my spine, and I started crying because I was so scared of it. I still have the recording, but I only ever show it to people that I trust. That wasn't the only strange thing that happened that night, but it was by far the one that sticks with us all the most. My brother has only listened to it that one time in the car afterward. He refuses to listen to it again. It's been 6 years. My girlfriend and I had found an old way through a forest that we wanted to explore at night, so we packed our backpacks and walked there at around 1:30 a.m. From the Google Maps point of view, that way should have taken us around 10 minutes. We started walking. It was dark and foggy, nothing creepy so far, until we reached a small lake. It wasn't even showing on the map. There was a small lodge next to it and a fence around it. We looked at it for a few minutes and went a little bit closer. As we almost reached the fence, a woman's scream came out of nowhere, and we just grabbed our bags and ran as fast as we could. The way we walked felt like it was all of a sudden never ending. We ran for almost 15 minutes until we finally reached the road. We did not know what was screaming. We didn't see anything, even with flashlights. We decided to go home and wait a few more hours to go back when the sun came up. But when we went there again, we saw nothing. We went to the fence, and there was no scream. We thought that's maybe what triggered it when you got too close because of whatever was in there. But there was just nothing. Also, the way now felt super short. Like it didn't even take us 10 minutes to walk to the road, but after the scream, it felt like we were running for at least 15 minutes straight. It may just be nothing, but this was the creepiest experience that I have ever had, and I still think about it today. Also, in the following days and weeks, we checked the news for missing people or anything like that, but again, there was nothing. I've always been pretty sensitive, and so have quite a few people in my family. I've seen dark figures, recorded a few voices, but nothing too major before this story. It was my senior year of high school, and I had been going through a period of what some may like to call paranormal investigating with my friends. We were spending time visiting cemeteries and abandoned houses, like most teenagers do. Just having fun being scared. Well, my friend Tyler found this Ouija board in an abandoned house that he had explored a month or so back and asked me if I wanted it. You see, he knew I was into the paranormal with all the love I had for being scared. I liked scary movies, haunted houses, and anything to get the adrenaline going. So of course I said yes. My friends Alex, David, and I decided to skip school, and I asked them if they wanted to use this Ouija board with me. They were along for the ride, and we had planned to find a place to do this. My house. My house was already known to be haunted because due to some experiences that I had had in my basement. So it seemed like the appropriate choice. Now my friend David didn't believe in anything paranormal. No ghosts or any of that stuff. So he decided to film this for us. Alex is sitting across from me, and I have my hands on the eye by myself. I figured you weren't supposed to do this alone from what I had seen in movies, but we did it anyway, just to see what would happen. Alex begins to ask some questions. Basic ones at first, like, is there anyone here with us? What's your name? What do you want? Alex then asks, are you trying to hurt Chris? And nothing really happens in that moment. But I do remember this distinct chill run down my spine. I brushed it off. We decided to watch the video back on David's phone just to see what it looked like. As we're watching this back, when it comes to the question of, are you trying to hurt Chris? In the video, my head tilts back and I say yes, in 2 different voices. one in my own voice, and one in a deep, guttural voice. We all look at each other and exclaim, "Oh my God. You didn't say that. You didn't say anything." And needless to say, we got rid of that board and never really talked about it again. But that was one of the most terrifying experiences I have ever had. So basically, me and my friend were messing around until he informed me about a part of the web so messed up and dangerous that it's illegal. I kinda thought he was bluffing, but asked to see anyway. I can't remember how he got there, but somehow he did, because he said he went on there for laughs and gags. When we got on there, everything seemed normal, until he started to see things with titles like military-grade lasers or military-grade integral silencers. As we got further in, we started seeing more things like drugs, and of course more illegal weapons. We finally just quickly scrolled through stuff since we didn't really see anything that piqued our interest, till we came across a website or something titled Daycare for Kids. When we clicked on it, we saw what looked to be a room covered in feces and blood with a caged mic in the middle. We got so scared, we closed out of the browsers as fast as possible and never went back.